Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for settling yourselves. My name is Pat Burns. I'm the Vice President for IT and the Dean of the Libraries here at CSU, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you today. So welcome to CSU, to Fort Collins, and to our FutureVisions activity, the theme of which is acceleration. The 2018 symposium we're at today started in 2005, and this is our sixth FutureVisions symposium. We seem to have these every 2 or 3-ish years, and they're some of the best events that we actually have. And in fact, being in higher education, we have a penchant to contemplate, and even it's our duty to start asking what's next, or what's the next best thing. And I've introduced FutureVisions a number of times, and I always quote Niels Bohr, the person who invented everything there was to know about the atom, who says, prediction is so difficult, especially about the future. And so this year's program is to continue ISTEC's very fine tradition of distinguished speakers who will help us peer over the next event horizon and help us answer what's next and even who's next in some cases. I'd like to thank our sponsors. This is being organized by the Information Science and Technology Center at CSU and planned by a committee of volunteers. I'd like to especially thank the outstanding co-chairs this year, Vim Bohm and Tin Amadon, for putting together an engaging and just an amazing program, and all the people who helped them, thank you all for that. And we have sponsorship this year from the Jeff Holmes Communication Technology and Advancement Fund. Jeff is here, I think, with 3 generations of his family. And Jeff, if you could be so kind as to give us a couple remarks to help us get kicked off, we'd appreciate it too.
Yeah, 3 generations, hard to believe. My grandson just said to me, who's graduating from CSU next month, he goes, I was in this, but not since my freshman year. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, well, I was in here in my freshman year, which was the last time I was here, except mine was 1965 and his was 3 years ago. I wanted to talk for a few minutes to get people to understand the opportunities that the world avails to you. I graduated with a degree in economics. I went into the investment business. I went from the investment business to the entertainment business. I went from the entertainment business to the technology part of the entertainment business, and now I run a little medical device company. So one of these days I'm going to figure out what I'm good at. But the point of this is that you think as you're looking at a college career and a graduate career that you really need to know what you want to do. And my comment to you is no, you don't need to know what you want to know, what you want to do. You need to understand what you think and then avail yourselves of what the world's going to offer. So I'll give you a couple examples of what I mean by this. When I was in the entertainment business, I was asked to run technology for Warner Communications and then Time Warner after that, when the 2 companies merged. I said to the chairman of the company, I'm the wrong person for running technology. I said, I don't even know anything about engineering. And he laughed and he said, well, that's okay, Jeff. He said, engineers really don't know much about what real people do. He said, but if you tell them what to do or where you're thinking about going, they'll get you there. And it was a very interesting comment. So understand about the entertainment business. You think that the entertainment business makes their money by selling movies, selling TV shows, and selling current albums. Albums are a thing that's sort of disappeared from the music business, but I suspect that there are a number of you in this room who will know the #1 act at Time Warner between 1980 and 1995. That act never put out an album in those 15 years, and most of you in this room probably bought it at one point or another. It was from a band called Led Zeppelin. The entertainment business makes their money by reselling their products. So my job was to think about where the future availed itself and try and deal with that accordingly. I started with a compact disc. Again, it's something that most of you don't know about anymore. The head of one of the largest record companies in the world said to me, "Over my dead body, will we ever sell our music on a CD?" 2 years later, his bonus was large enough that he could buy his body back because he was able to resell everything he did. I took the CD, and I guess one of my claims to fame, if there is any, is that we did the same thing with films. We took our product and we resold it. We had videotapes in the 80s that people rented. We took those same movies, put them on a disc, same principle. The only difference was the technology was better. So the disc had all sorts of capabilities in it, thanks to the engineers. So I could sell a movie in Europe in 18 countries, 18 different soundtracks, one piece of inventory, and I could sell it to people for $15 as opposed to videotapes that we sold for $80. And the film industry made so much money, it was almost a sin. Except there is no such thing as a sin of making money. The next thing that came along in my life shortly thereafter, Time Warner was also the second largest company in the cable television industry. And I was fortunate enough to have a couple engineers who explained to me how we delivered our product over a cable television system. And I was able to figure out off of that what it really meant. And I was telling a couple of people at lunch today, I actually made a presentation at the White House to then Vice President Al Gore, who had invented the internet, as I think many of you know. And I explained to him that we had a system that would allow us to deliver broadband, we didn't even know what the term meant, broadband technology and entertainment to people in their homes. And we could do that for almost no money, and this was going to occur very quickly. So this would have been 1993, 94, to put just a little time in perspective. And we did. And the first thing we did with our cable system is we sent a happy birthday wish to all of our customers. Well, those of you who know about the cable TV industry, you know they don't do anything nice to their customers. And that was really the start of it. And we learned one interesting thing. It's one last story, and then I'll stop. We had the first truly interactive network in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, Ohio had demographics like no other city in America in those days. And Ronald Reagan had hired us to do studies for him. So we asked people via traditional media marketing, who would you vote for? And in those days, it seems the Republicans own this sort of category. Women would all say they did not like Reagan and they weren't going to vote for him. And the polls were really quite interesting in those days. We then asked people the same question on their television set in their home. And we discovered people don't lie to their TV. And we actually predicted the election. We were down, I think, into 4 decimal points of the final vote on the election. This is all a way of saying to you that the world changes, and it continually changes, but people don't change. The purpose of doing this seminar, and the reason we started doing this, is because we want to show to you all what we think collectively the world's going to look like in 5 years. None of us will be right, but that doesn't matter. You can then look at this and think about your role and where you see yourself within that vision. Narrow the vision to what you think you're good at, and then position yourself for that. If you look at all of the apps that are played on the internet today, most of them start not with engineers, but they start with consumers saying, I'd like to do this, who then go out and hire software engineers and designers to create it for them. So there's a huge opportunity as the world goes on, and you all are going to be in the most fun time. And I just say to you, I'm proud that I was able to make a little money and to help set up a foundation here to sponsor this, because this is what a university should be doing. And in my opinion, going back in time when I first got involved with Greg Leff from the journalism school and started talking about this, that the universities weren't doing. So I hope you take advantage of these. The speakers are terrific, the opportunities to question, you've got brilliant minds, and have a good time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeff. That was real wisdom. And, you know, it's all about innovation. And CSU advertises itself as the Green University. We're into reuse and recycling, and now I'm going to add a third R, which is reselling. So if you get there firstest with the mostest, you can succeed, and success breeds success. So the theme, as we said, is acceleration. And my friend Pete Seal, who helped organize this for many years, asked me to speak about the latest Thomas L. Friedman book, and his title for that is Running to Keep Up. The title of the book is Thank You for Being Late. Okay, and it's all about the ever-accelerating rate of change and how difficult it is to maintain currency and keep up with the field. And it's even harder to catch up than it is to maintain currency. And it's so hard these days, that reminds me of the definition of a pessimist. A pessimist is an optimist with lots and lots of experience. So how do we keep up? And Pete gave me the right word for this. As the Dean of Libraries, I say read. Read everything and try to read facts. And come to ISTech FutureVisions symposium, too. It's my pleasure now to introduce the first speaker on keeping up with the internet. The central issue for our first speaker, Lee Rainey of Pew Research, is this topic. His formal title is Director of Internet Research for Pew. They have issued over 650 meticulously researched reports on the internet, its users, and trends in its evolution. So start your reading there if you're interested in the future of the internet. He is trained as a journalist and was formerly the editor of U.S. News and World Report. His undergraduate degree is from Harvard, and his master's in political science is from Long Island University. Please join me in welcoming Lee Rainey with his thoughts on the future of the internet.
Thanks so much, Pat. It's an honor to be here. And the last part of my talk is going to be about the history and need for social innovation. One of the ways that people master technology is to try to cope with it and try to tame it. And you're sitting in a space of social innovation thanks to Jeff Holmes. You know, this kind of event wasn't taking place anywhere in America not too long ago. People meeting, talking about stuff, that's a very common thing. But doing it with the patronage of a successful entrepreneur, and doing it under the auspices of a university, and doing it with a come one, come all crowd, that's pretty new. And it's a testament to a nice vision, and it's a great example of how maybe some of the worst stuff that might be happening as we think about the future can be mitigated by smart people doing smart things in smart places in smart ways. We self-describe at the Pew Research Center that we are a fact tank. We don't say we're a think tank because think tanks are people and organizations that promote ideas. They are advocates for solutions to political and social problems. That's not the line of work we're in. We do a lot of primary research about how technology is affecting people now and where it might go in the future, but we don't do it, I would be fired actually, it's a firing offense at Pew, with an agenda driving our work. We're not here to be advocates for any kind of future for the internet. We don't promote policies. We're not cheerleaders for digital technologies. We hope we do generate information that's useful for people as they're planning it in their own lives, and we hope we do it in a dispassionate enough way that they will find it useful for their work, but I'm not here to sell you something. I'm here to talk about a lot of work that we've done that looks a little bit over the horizon about the future of the internet. Since 2004, we've been conducting these large canvassings of experts of the internet. We identified them through their smart predictions about the early days of the internet, probably when Jeff was helping invent it. And then we saw that they were so smart in the early 90s about what was going to be happening in the early 2000s that we began this regular series of canvassings to ask people about what was going to be happening in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. So since 2005, the first canvassing was 2004, first report is 2005, we've issued a long-running series of reports. We're going to issue our 9th version next week about the impact of the internet on well-being in the future. But we have a pretty good track record of seeing what's over the horizon and beginning to think about some of the changes that are occurring. The very first survey we did, our headline finding was cyber attacks were on their way. These experts who both study technology as well as are builders of systems and original creators and pioneers of the internet, they saw that the internet was going to embed itself so deeply in utilities and business life and things like that, it would just be too ripe a target, and it had so many vulnerabilities that it would be victimized by people who wanted to do harm. Cyber attacks now are a top-of-mind thing. There are going to be important discussions here today about it because it's a central preoccupation of our government and the people who run our economy. They predicted the shift to mobile. That's already underway. They talked about increasing concerns about privacy. You don't have to look any earlier than the beginning part of this week to see how people's concerns about privacy are now a top-of-mind element of our culture. It talked about the growth of fringe groups. They didn't call it tribalism at the time, and they didn't call it terror groups, but that was embedded in many of the answers they got there. We talked about hyperconnectivity with people, and one of the wonderful insights that we got from the predictions that people made was that some people were predicting that personal social networks would eventually become almost an evolutionary, rewarded, or harmed aspect of human life. The people who are good at building their networks and exploiting their networks and understanding them with new technologies were going to be in great shape in the future. And the people who didn't do it well, and particularly the people who are not tech savvy enough to sort of be in command of their networks, they were going to suffer. And in many ways, the Darwinian selection would probably minimize their degree of suffering over the long term. But there was an interesting way in which now the things that we are living under are eventually going to affect how we evolve as a species. They talked about the rise of virtual and augmented reality. There's some fabulous presentations on that later in the program here. They talked about new boundaries in social and work life. As a matter of fact, no boundaries in some sense. And we now live in a world where you can do home things at work and work things at home and leisure things while you're in the midst of doing busy things and doing busy things while you're in the midst of leisure. So there are lots of ways that we are renegotiating social contracts, social relationships, and social norms because of that. We talked about the decline of TV. We're living that in many direct ways now. Talked about the rise of cyber currencies. And every once in a while, we'd ask a question that was sort of a profound metaphysical question about what is all this connectivity going to do to such things as tolerance and wisdom? Would it make it smarter? Would it make us more tolerant of each other? Each time we've done that, we've probably done 4 or 5 versions over the years on subjects like this, we get an absolutely split verdict. Half the respondents say, yup, It can't be anything but better when more information is available to people in their lives, more connectivity, more contact with people. We're going to improve as a species. We have to have more understanding of each other, and we have to be smarter with each other. The other half of people say, absolutely not. Human beings are a fixed quantity. We evolved on the savannas of Africa. We're deeply tribal. We're deeply manipulable. Human nature is never going to change. All this is going to give us is a new set of tools to make each other miserable. And so I've got a little bit more data on that in our recent surveys, but it's interesting that there's just no consensus on the direction we're heading to in the future. And because I'm invited to places like this, one of the years I sort of did a cheap trick was I asked all of these thousands of technologists that we talked to, I said, do you guys know, do you smart people who are inventing the future, do you know which gadgets are coming around the next corner we turn? Or is stuff going to surprise you, right? And the verdict we got on this, again, the statistics on this aren't awesome because it's a convenience sample. It's not a public opinion sample. But we're talking a couple thousand very different, diverse scientists. 16% said, we can see the future. 81% said, we don't even know what's coming along. And we did this in 2011, I think, or 2010. And the iconic thing that they pointed out was, if you had asked us this question in the year 2000, none of us would have predicted the iPhone. You know, the technology for the iPhone existed since the mid-90s. Microsoft had a version, Apple had a version, and stuff like that. So something didn't happen in that critical moment that convinced people there's no market for this, there's no social need for this, there's just not a consumer base for it. And the iPhone, of course, has upended all of our lives. 77% of American adults have smartphones now. It's the fastest deploying consumer electronic technology in the history of the world. The slope of the curve of the adoption is greater than for television, for cable, for radio, for the internet itself, for personal computers. It's an amazing story. So they said, basically, we don't even know the future. So don't feel bad if you walk out of this stuff. There are a lot of smart folks here who do see around corners and probably can convince you at least of some of the things that are around the corner. But a lot of us don't really know exactly how it's going to shape up. And a lot of us don't exactly know even what the gadgetry is underlying it. So in a series of things that we've done since that time, we've asked about the year 2025 or the year 2030. And we've asked about how the internet in particular, but the cluster of digital technologies are going to roll out. And the sort of meta conclusion that we reached in a survey like this is that by the year 2025, again, these are these experts' views, the internet will become like electricity. Less visible, yet more deeply embedded in people's lives for good and for ill. One of the classic definitions of when technology has real power is when it fades into the background. That's when people have so deeply embraced it that they don't even know they're using it. When you walked into this room today, you didn't sit down in your seat and say, thank God I'm on electricity, right? The only thing that you would have thought is if the lights weren't on and the microphone didn't work, is what's wrong? Well, the internet's going to get to that point relatively soon in our lives with both good and not so good consequences. So the sort of mega trends that these experts saw, they talked about a global immersive ambient network of computing environment built through all this stuff, all the connected devices and sensors and other smart gadgets that would be deployed around the world. It would just literally, the world would be surrounded by a digital skin that could be manipulated and used by all sorts of devices to provide all sorts of insights. That skin would serve up data to people that would allow them to know a lot more about what was going on in the world, both sort of directly in their personal experience of the environment, but also through augmented reality, the use of algorithms that could predict sort of what was relevant to them in the place where they were, and that the sort of gadgetry around them. They were beginning to talk about self-driving cars and drones and the way that they would be feeding information and amplifying our capacities. Then they talked about the ways in which, particularly in a gigabit environment, a whole new cluster of applications would emerge, starting with our own agents, our own holograms, and literally our own presence with other people being renegotiated because you actually didn't, in this environment, have to be physically near someone to be engaged with them. but your hologram could be interacting with their hologram, or your agent could be interacting with their agent, and it would feel good enough that it would feel almost like the real encounter itself. And that would change business relationships and the way people procured products and services. It would certainly change a lot of community activities. It might change the airline industry and things like that. And of course, they all talked about the way that virtual reality would be creating incredibly powerful immersive experiences for folks, that they could literally be living in a better version of the world they're already in, or living in a realistic seeming version of a world that doesn't exist in real life here. They also talked about the way that our sort of cognitive functions, literally our attention and the way we allocate our time, would be affected by this proliferation of media. In addition to the world having a skin of connected relationships, we ourselves have data all around us. It's really like a second skin. You know, you can summon it up at any time you want. You can access it whenever you want. And there are ways now that this ubiquitous media and information environment is going to change the way that people allocate their attention and particularly their focus on media. I say there are 5 of them. These experts had fewer numbers, but I'm going to add my own interpretation on this. One new zone I call signals. It's literally the way you set up alerts on your phone, right? About 25% of Americans say now that they are constantly online. And that literally doesn't mean that they're looking at their screens every minute of every day, but it does mean that they have set up alerts and signals from their screens to sort of say, let me know when this thing that's happened in the world that I care about, and I will then access that signal because you've told me. News has changed, the stock market's changed, my sports team has lost, my best buddy is posted on my Facebook site or something like that. So we're now in an environment where we have set up these automatic alarms when things matter to us. Snacking environment is an environment where now what you guys did before we all started talking, right? You were looking at your phones. So you had a little bit of time to kill. Maybe you were talking to your neighbors, but basically you're dosing yourself with media and things that just fill in the gaps of your life, maybe when you're waiting for the light to change or when you're waiting in line at the grocery store or something like that. So you're snacking now on media. It's invaded your life in a new way. Social streams are the things that you were doing lots with social media, but it could be any kind of web app or things like that. It literally means that there are times a day when you dip your ladle in the stream just to see what's happening, maybe during your lunch hour, maybe after dinner or something like that. You're checking in on what's going on, and you're not reading comprehensively what's going on in the news or what's going on in all of your social media feeds, but you're seeing what's happening at that moment in front of you. And again, it's a sort of a different approach to people's access to media than has ever existed before. Of course, we live in a split-screen environment now. People often have multiple screens on when they're accessing media. One is a primary screen, but the other is the chatter screen, right? So when there's a big sports event or when there's a big cultural event, like the Oscars or the Emmys or the last episode of Mad Men, you know, you're watching the show, but you're also watching the commentary on the show because that's how you make meaning out of it, and that's how you can contribute your own ideas, usually your snarky ideas about what's going on. But that's a different kind of environment than the one where we were passive consumers of media. I talk about Spreeville or Village or binging because it's a wholly new idea that you're in charge of the play button of your life and you can watch 10, 12, 16 hours continuously of TV, or you can keep on and off pausing. It's changing the narrative arc of our storytelling capacity, these sort of Game of Thrones life kind of thing, where you have these sort of prolonged narratives or multiple narratives and things like that. Movies didn't quite deliver that experience. Even TV series didn't quite deliver that experience, although the late Stephen Bochco introduced us to that idea. But it's a completely different way of accessing media, and it's sort of crowded out a lot of traditional broadcast television and other media things, and so that's important. And I put Tom Cruise up there in this scene from the Minority Report because I think we're soon enough going to enter a space I call synthesized spaces, where our algorithms are the corporate understanding of who we are, our app's understanding of who we are, is going to feed us material no matter where we are, using available wall space or other kinds of screen space, using our phone if we've used it. But we'll be able to manipulate data ambiently and haptically rather than having to type or swipe or things like that. A lot of it will come from voice activation, which is sort of the way that we orchestrate now the Internet of Things in our lives. We'll be talking to the air, but all of a sudden the air will be delivering back to us the data and insights and media that we want. So there are some good things that'll come from this, at least according to these experts. The first thing is that we will just have, life will be more seamless. We'll be able to share information with each other. We'll be able to extract data from the environment. We'll be able to access things in a much easier, more convenient way. It'll make the world smarter, safer, and more efficient. So a lot of the earliest enthusiasms about the Internet of Things is it's just going to make supply chain problems and accessing to consumers way easier and way more efficient, which means the prices are probably going to reflect that. And their communication is a way that sort of digital devices like bots or like your agent or stuff like that are going to communicate with other aspects of this ecosystem so that you'll just essentially be an enhanced human being. You'll have other cognitive type activities conducted in your behalf without you necessarily being the cognition that's driving those interactions. It's going to advance productivity and enhance leisure. The second thing they talked about was the rise of artificial intelligence. Literally, we're entering a world in the not-distant future where the Internet's everywhere and artificial intelligence is riding atop it. So the artificial intelligence world is everywhere. We're going to use all these sort of extra devices that are going to be able to access that material. It's going to be serving us in interesting ways. And the two domains where this might show up most dramatically and have the biggest impact are healthcare and education. Over the years, when we've talked to these experts about the Internet, they've been so frustrated that education and healthcare have been the lagging indicators in embracing this stuff, in using it efficiently, in making it work for people and patients and students and things like that. Well, now, as this world becomes infused with data and the tools that provide data and media to us, those two domains are eventually going to be affected in very, very dramatic ways, too, for the better. And they talked about the environment itself becoming censored. The Internet of Things, of course, relates to all of the ways in which bodies, homes, communities, environment, and industry are going to be sending signals to us. One of the benefits that you get you get lots of benefits out of that, not least of which is you learn more about yourself, and the environment itself begins to get smart. So if a building that has smart sensors in it begins to sense that there are cracks in the core girders, that's going to be read out to the engineers who will be able to fix it before there are serious structural problems in the building. There are ways in which the environment now tells us incredibly rich stories about what's going on, and we'll be able to understand global systems in dramatic new ways and make improvements and think about interventions that will make things better. Great, okay? Smarter, faster, safer, more knowledgeable about ourselves and the environment. What could go wrong? Well, there's actually a longer list of the things that these folks worry about. It starts with privacy, right? It's every time we talk about anything related to the future of the Internet, there's a predictable cohort of these experts that talk about it, and why not? It's increasingly challenged. This week provides dramatic new evidence of it. I think what's been so striking about the Zuckerberg Cambridge Analytica story is that since the Snowden revelations of mid-2013 and all of the cybersecurity breaches since then, including most powerfully the Equifax data breach, but also data breaches of government officials and things like that, we pick up public concern about these things in our surveys, and yet we pick up no behavioral change. They still get the stuff, they still use the stuff, they still say they like the stuff. We're going to put out survey findings in a couple of weeks that basically say the vast, vast, vast overwhelming majority of Americans say the Internet works for them and they love it, despite all of this stuff. They're a little worried now in ways they didn't used to be, though, about the overall impact on society. And they are increasingly concerned, and will be so in the future, about what happens to my data after it is captured. They're mystified by how it's shared and passed along. They're worried about the profiling that's going to be done of them based on the combination of data sets that will be used. Everybody might have heard that in China now, they're going to reward people with social credit scores. If you've got a high score that you're a good citizen and a good neighbor and a good worker and a good street crosser, you get a high score, and you might get benefits at the marketplace, you might get benefits in social dealings and stuff like that. I mentioned crossing the street because literally there was a system rolled out in Shanghai last week. Using face recognition, they are watching people jaywalk across streets. And if they jaywalk and they're spotted doing it, they get a text message saying, this is your first warning, don't do it again or you're going to get fined. Right? So that's the social scoring system. Americans don't quite understand it evolving that quickly here, but they're really worried and they don't know how to fix it. And one of the striking things these experts said was that privacy is eventually going to become something that the rich might be able to afford and lots of other people can't. In effect, we're already living our lives public by default and private by effort. It will get even more pronouncedly public in the future as these systems roll out. The nature of work will change, so our interactions with machines are evolving. The rise of robotics, the rise of artificial intelligence and other things is that we're renegotiating literally what skills are performed in the marketplace, and there are ways that routinized jobs, sometimes dirty jobs, sometimes dangerous jobs, are being outsourced to the machine. And okay, that might be good, but eventually you run out of skills that only humans can uniquely perform, at least according to some of these folks, and you get a different kind of social disruption where you have lots of unemployed or underemployed folks who are not happy about that situation. So a sort of renegotiation of the social contract is in the offing. In our future, we're going to have a much more urgent debate in the coming years, according to these folks, on guaranteed basic income. And there are going to be interesting ways that human beings are going to get wiped out. Their dignity, their agency, their self-worth is deeply implicated in these kinds of developments. And we don't yet have the tools for addressing that. That's what freaks them out. Just a little side note, we've asked in two different ways interesting things about the future of work. A couple of years ago, even before this debate really got rolling about the future of work, we asked these experts, what do you think is going to happen? More jobs created than destroyed, or more jobs destroyed than created? We got one of those 50-50 verdicts. Half said more created than destroyed, half said more destroyed than created. And it was a fabulous, interesting precursor debate to the thing that's rising in urgency now. So the follow-up question we actually asked last year is, how are job training and education systems going to respond to this? And there's much more hope that, including folks who run universities, are going to adjust to this new reality, offer different kinds of courses, offer different kinds of credentialing processes, offer different kinds of avenues to teach things that humans are really good at and machines probably won't be good at in the foreseeable future. The awful term for this is soft skills. That's not what it really is, but it's critical thinking skills, it's terrific communication skills, it's being able to work with diverse folks and recognize patterns and be critical thinkers about that. So all that stuff is going to get emphasized in the future because that's how sort of we're going to distinguish ourselves from our computer overlords. They worry about digital divides a lot. There are new ways in which sort of classic socioeconomic problems get amplified in this environment. People who aren't tech savvy, people who aren't particularly shrewd about information, people who don't really work well in communities, people who don't have awesome social networks, they're going to get hammered in this new environment because the pace of change, just what you say here, right? Keeping up with the speed of innovation. Those folks probably are not going to be in good shape, whereas the people who do that are going to be even more likely pulled to a higher rungs on the ladder than they currently are. So divisions are actually going to amplify, according to some of these experts. They worried about the human toll of this stuff. One of the sort of lines that people use is abuses and abusers will evolve and scale. Again, sort of making each other miserable. These are just a new set of very powerful tools to make life difficult for other people. Bullying and tribal sort of rivalry and stuff like that is a major part of this, and we're just going to make each other even more miserable. Oh. And then the fifth thing they talk about is that humans have never been running in sync with technology change. It's just too much to expect. The technology comes into being, and humans either pull it down to their level or embrace other changes in life. And yet the amount of change that is accelerating now, perfect underline for the headline of this conference, there's so much change taking place on so many fronts that we are simultaneously going to have to evolve our morals and ethics and social structures and relationship with each other, our relationship with our government, the polities relationship. So everything's up for grabs, and it's coming because it's not only this informatics stuff, but it's happening, with tons of brain research. We're now learning amazing new things, and that's only the beginning of story of how our brains work. There's stupendous changes coming in nanotechnology and biotechnology. So keep it, our systems now can barely keep up with one big problem at a time. As a matter of fact, arguably, they're not even doing so good at that. But when it's pressing on so many fronts now, there's a lot of concern that the runaway future of technology is going to outpace the human capacity to control it. So I work in Washington, and I live in Virginia, and maybe the best lesson to learn from history is one that Thomas Jefferson conveyed in a letter to a friend after his presidency was over. And it's on the, if you go to Washington, if you go to the Jefferson Memorial, this is on the fourth panel of that memorial is this thought from Thomas Jefferson that's so central to what we're talking about today. Laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths disclosed, and manners and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also and keep pace with the times. So that's a challenge for us. Days gone by, we figured stuff out. There have been disruptions and harms and difficulties that have come from it, but eventually humans prevail. So take a page from Jeff, socially innovate, figure out new ways that we're going to make this stuff work for us rather than have it break our backs. Thank you very much.
I'm Dr. Pete Seal, professor in journalism here at CSU. This is my sixth FutureVisions. We started back in 2005. Just a really quick story. Back in 2005 at the first FutureVisions, we had a speaker from HP named Bob Gann. And Bob Gann gave a talk on the future of visualization. And in 2005, Bob Gann predicted that in the future we would have one camera that would do it all. One camera that would take stills, one camera that would do video with equal quality. And he said there is no way one camera could ever do that. One camera to do it all. In 2007, the iPhone came out, end of debate. So things people have been talking about since FutureVisions started have now come to pass. So things you're hearing today, you'll probably be seeing evolve over the next 5 years. And that's what we asked our speakers to do, look ahead 5 years, 2018 to 2023, and predict their vision of the future. So I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker. She's Beth Plally. She's a PhD. She's a professor of informatics and computing at Indiana University, which is my alma mater for my PhD. She lives in Bloomington, Indiana. She's on loan right now for 3 years to the National Science Foundation. So she's living in Washington, and she's a science advisor for public access for the National Science Foundation. So she's been conducting interviews with other folks here while she's here, and we're very pleased to have her here as our next speaker. Her topic is big data. And big data, you'll know it because it's called the U.S. Census, coming out soon, big data. Also, CSU is known for hurricane predictions. We've been doing that since Bill Gray was doing it 15 years ago. And that's definitely big data. And they're predicting 14 hurricanes this year, an active hurricane year. 7 of them will hit the United States. So this is big data as it influences people's lives. So I'm pleased to introduce Beth talking about big data. Welcome.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invite. Where am I pointing? Just okay. This is a talk on big data and open science. I am, as Pete mentioned, the science advisor for public access at the National Science Foundation. The thoughts and opinions I'm expressing here are my own thoughts and opinions. So open science is a term that's been used internationally. It's been endorsed by governments to describe economic and societal benefit that comes from just a continued stream of scientific discovery that has basically been delivered since, mostly post-World War II. A new piece of that is the data piece, and this captures open science, today's data, tomorrow's discovery, and there's actually a document at the National Science Foundation that's labeled just this. It's this public access plan, and it implies that data that are produced today are the basis of discoveries tomorrow, and that underpins much of my belief. So open science motivates everyone that's carrying out research to be more attentive to the public availability of, or openness of the products of their research. And that's publications, which we have a long history with publications, and we get our access primarily through library subscriptions in the university setting, but also the primary data, the physical samples, software, and other supporting materials. All of this falls under the open science umbrella. The trajectory of research, as many of us know, is international, and it's highly collaborative and interdisciplinary. And what does that do for the individual who is carrying out their research, perhaps through their own funding in this larger context? And how are they a good open science citizen in this larger context? So looking at this from the perspective of NSF as a funder, so the National Science Foundation encourages open science, and it does so with language, policy language like this. Investigators are expected to share with other researchers at no more than incremental cost within reasonable time the primary data, samples, physical collections, and other supporting materials created or gathered in the course of work under NSF grants. So a person who is funded by an agency like the National Science Foundation, NIH is not much different, NOAA, NASA, DOE, these other funding agencies, that this is the open science obligation. And then there's an expectation. And the way in which that's brought about is through the data management plan. So a researcher, when they write their proposal, their 15-page proposal description, they include a data management plan. And here they identify the products of their research, the non-publication products of the research, and how they expect those to be made openly available. And these are the products that they create during the course of their research. This then, and that becomes a document in their grant proposal. And then while that grant proposal is going through merit review, the data management plan is examined. So this is an opportunity for the community of your peers to give input to whether or not how you say you're going to take care of your data is viable from the community's norms. So this is the context in which an individual researcher works. So let's look at this in the context of big data, and there's a point I want to make here. So we're going to look at this from the context of a single organization, and then what I call this mid-scale infrastructure. So we've got, let me see if I can get a pointer here. Okay, so we've got a typical computer science abstraction here. It's actually coming out of MapR, so the diagram that I found. Okay, so there's a data lake. It's a concept of data flows into this lake. You could call it a warehouse. Data lake is the new term for it. And in that data lake, it undergoes life cycle management. There's transformations that take place. The lineage of that data is important to capture. Where did it come from? What kind of data is it? The data sources are multiple. Again, this is in the context of a single organization. This could be, a single large project at a university. It could be, a company. This diagram happens to capture the company setting better. The data are coming from, relational databases, documents, emails, social media, blogs, tweets, link data, clickstream, sensor data. And the notion of the data lake is that all that is flowing into this data lake, and then analysis that takes place, which is shown on the right-hand side, is taking place over all of this heterogeneous data that's in the context of this data lake. And then there's actions like auditing that take place. So this is a very viable big data architecture and set of sources and actions in the context of a single organization. And when you're doing that, we look at the inputs and the outputs, because that's let's focus on the inputs and the outputs. Those inputs, those data sources, could be open source. Some of them may be open source, or they're controlled by agreements. And then on the output side, depending on the organization, those products, if it's in the setting of a company, those products are probably proprietary because they're being used for making strategic decisions, or they're subject to the guidance of a funder. So this setting is a well understood setting for activity to take place because the terms for the inputs and the terms for the outputs are well understood. So the first main point I want to make on the talk is this second case, and this is the emerging case that I'm calling the mid-scale infrastructure. And let's look at, we're just taking that same architecture diagram so that it's a familiar one to you. It's still this Hadoop data lake, only now it's taking in fMRI data. And it's doing so from multiple researchers. So we've got researcher Alice, researcher Bob, researcher Carlos, researcher Eve. For those of you who come from the security background, these are well-known characters. And they are they're each contributing fMRI data to this Hadoop data lake. And they're doing it so that they can carry out analytics that's done over a larger collection than if they were to be able to utilize only their contributions. And this is some imaginary, federally funded project. And they may be using this in a classroom setting. It's now extremely valuable when you can get researchers from multiple sources contributing data into a single collection. So these researchers contribute their data to this fMRI data lake, we'll call it, and then in return they're given use of the entire collection of the fMRI data. Now, this is a win. This is a huge win. But let's go back to that obligation this jumps a little bit, sorry about that. But let's go back to that obligation that individual researcher made when they got funding from their federal agency. So Bob had written into his data management plan that he would make available, more broadly, open science, the data that his project creates. Okay, and this is the key. He thinks, or he should think, that contributing his data to the data lake should satisfy his DMP. I'm sharing my data, I'm sharing it with the data lake, it's going to therefore be open science, it's therefore going to be open and comply to my data management plan. So he gets to use the larger collection, and he gets to dispense with the obligation under his data management plan. It's perfect. However, the data lake owners are saying, and this is the state of research today, the data lake owners are saying, wait a minute, we do analysis, we don't do open science. And then this is the state, again, the state that we're at right now. We're not an archive, we're not a repository. This is the state of things today. And we see this in academic settings where we've got our library, and our library is doing their darndest to take data sets and make them available over the long term. And then we've got these active research projects. Those need to come together better than they come together today. So in the case where we've got this mid-scale infrastructure with numerous research contributors and that are guided by separately funded projects and they're contributing, there's mismatched expectations, and that, in my mind, is a big open question today. Okay, point number 2. We talked about data. By 2020, the volume of digital data is going to reach 40 zettabytes. Big number. If you break it down into 1 gigabyte files, which are big files, that is 1 trillion files. And let's call each one of those a data object. So I'm going to convert to the term data object. So we've got 1 trillion data objects. Okay, let's add 1.5 billion projected Internet of Things devices. Those are the ones with cellular service, which are projected by 2020. That gives us 150 billion more data objects. This assumes you're chunking, each device by monthly chunks and so on. There's a chunking there's a chunking behind that. So we had 150 billion more data objects. Okay. We've got 1.5 trillion data objects out there, and let's just suppose science is 1% of that. The research data is 1% of that. How is a researcher who's tasked with something like global diversity supposed to find, say, they're tasked with finding 1,000 data objects from these 11 billion data objects that are conservatively the science data? How are they going to find the science data? How are they going to find the small portion of biodiversity data within that? You know, we can sit back and we can say, well, Google is going to solve all of our problems. Google has their own problems. Okay, so envision something like a data object layer where you've got some network of independent, globally unique, persistent data objects that have relationships between them. So we've got, you know, object A, which is metadata. Object A is metadata for object B, and object B is a revision of object C. Object F is derived from object E, and object G is a part of object F, and D is just sitting out there by itself. So we've got each of these data objects that I pointed out, the 11 billion, we've got these data objects, and they have relationships between them. And, you know, if you recognize this, our computers are linked in this way. You know, they don't have these kind of semantically rich relationships between them, but they're linked like this. Can we envision a similar network of data objects? Some of those are going to be in repositories, so the repositories are entities in this networked object world itself. But the objects themselves should be able to reside independent or have identity independent of the repositories in which they exist. So we have this lightweight data object overlay, which the basis of it is persistent identifiers for data. I'll come back to that. And this is a segue to these FAIR principles, which some of you may be familiar with. But going back to that 11 billion object problem, by us as a community advocating for the unique identification of the data objects that we produce, and this is like a DOI for papers. We do a similar thing for the data objects, and we all do it in, you know, one or two or maybe three different ways. That's a key step to getting the kind of discoverability that we need over our scientific data. So it's one of the major barriers to our sharing is, you know, we think that an ID that we assign based on whatever we come up with is going to hold globally. It will not. So we need to move as a you know, in the open science community, and researchers and you know, and funders and whatnot need to move toward the global adoption of these persistent IDs. And what takes us there are these FAIR principles. Is anybody familiar? People heard of the FAIR principles at all? Give me a tiny bit of recognition on. And this came out in 2015 under the umbrella of Force 11 organization. It's caught on simply because it's intuitive. Data objects are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and that's where the FAIR comes from. And it is a concise and measurable set of principles for scientific data management, so it allows metrics to be defined against which one can measure whether or not a repository or a solution is fair. People often draw a line between the F and the A and the I and the R, and they say those top two are easier than the bottom two to bring about, and that's true. So just going over them very, very briefly, to be findable, number one, the metadata and data are assigned to globally unique and eternally. Eternally, good, okay. I like that. It'll long be beyond my time, but eternal is fine with me. Persistent identifier and data are described with rich metadata, so the accessibility goes a step deeper. Retrievable by their identifier using some standard communication protocol. Metadata are accessible even if the data are no longer available. You know, and the FAIR principles have a very strong machine actionability orientation. In other words, it's not going to be humans with browsers trying to find their data. It's going to be machines working on their behalf to find data for them, machine services. And the metadata formats utilize shared vocabularies, and the metadata and the data are sufficiently well described so that reuse is possible. You got to be able to trust the data, you got to be able to assess its fitness for use, you have to be able to use it. That's probably our biggest challenge right now. So the FAIR principles are a concise and measurable set of principles for scientific data management, as I've said. And while these principles make intuitive sense and there's considerable talk internationally about what they mean, what the FAIR principles mean, they're still, what they mean from a policy perspective is still is an ongoing conversation. So I made 3 major points. Open science embodied in our research practices not only are, okay, I'm done with it, I'm ready to hand it off point of our research, but embodied in our everyday research that assumes that those objects are part of ongoing research, that open science can be embedded at that point, and that was the mid-scale infrastructure that I pointed out. This exponential growth that we're going to see in persistent IDs. Handles is one persistent ID. It's used to identify baby food containers. It's used to identify movie clips. How are we going to find the research data? So we need this notion of persistent IDs as the first step, and then some type of overlay network which helps us to link things together. And then the wide adoption of these FAIR-like principles are a very pragmatic way to make all science open science. So thank you.
Our next speaker is Steve Geringer from Cable Labs. He has a very extensive resume, and he has a BS in Computer and Information Science from the University of Maryland. He worked for 12 years as an intelligence analyst for the NSA, and he worked as a telecom manager for Quest. You may remember Quest. And he's now principal security architect for Cable Labs. What I really like to hear, I like to hear more about this. He's also a security working group chairperson for the Center for Medical Interoperability. That's a key hot topic right now. The notion that your medical data can be shared has to be done within the HIPAA guidelines to be able to be confidential. That's a security issue as well. So please take it away, Steve.
Those are hard talks to follow. So good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction. I love the future that we're creating. We're going to live longer. We're going to have increasingly productive and more fun lives. And it's a future worth protecting. I'm going to show you why. But my transparency comes at a price. See, nothing's ever free. Just ask Facebook. I need your help. I need heroes. I need people, professors, teachers, students. Everybody in this room gets stuck to get as excited about our connected future as I am so we can build and protect that future together. So the other speakers skipped the obligatory background thing, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it provides some context. I started my career off in the Army as a telecommunications specialist. It was a long time ago. There was no internet. There was no wireless communications, all right? The idea of a floppy disk was absolute state-of-the-art. They were just brand new. I liked what I did in the Army, and I liked telecom, but I liked the idea of being an intelligence analyst more. And I tried to do that in the Army, and the Army said no, and that made me realize I was tired of being ordered around, so I left. And found my way into the National Security Agency in telecom, but I worked my way into intelligence analyst, and that was fun because that was about 1988, 1989. What was happening? The internet was happening. Wireless communications was happening. All this communication stuff was just starting. And there was no idea of this notion of security. Didn't exist. So it made my job as an intelligence analyst easy because what I did was learn how to exploit all those neat new things that we were doing. And it was fun, but I got tired of it, and after a while I wanted to broaden my horizons even more. I want to be innovative and creative, and that's just not something you do in the government. So I left and thought I was done with security, thought I was done with all the intelligence stuff, and I wasn't. It kept on coming back, but eventually really got away and ended up in Cable Labs. And I've been a principal security architect there for a few years. And the problem with build slides is you forget to do the builds. So Cable Labs is a nonprofit innovation and research development group for the cable industry. And I bring it up here because it's an awful lot like a university, right? I do your job, except I get paid better, right? I get to do all this research and do great things to help us impact millions and millions and millions of homes. So, the future. Why am I excited about the future? Innovation at Cable Labs is all about neurodiversity, challenging our assumptions, always trying to change our perspective so we can realize what great new thing we can do next. And it's about meeting with groups like this. It's about having good, lots of fun, being creative, meeting people like Jeff and Lee, and learning things that are going on that's new. And you know, one moment I may be talking to a friend about how she's going to double the bandwidth of a given wireless solution. The next I'll be sitting down innovating how to improve public key infrastructure. And by the afternoon, I'll be looking at how to help people aging in the home in the future. Broadband, it's been mentioned a few times already, is transforming how we work, where we work, how we play and interact with our friends and family, how we care for our health. And this transformation isn't something we can just dream about. It's happening now. It's here and it's awesome. How many people here know that you can already get, that the technology to deliver 10 gigabits per second to the home already exists? It's already there. It's not just gigabit, it's 10 gigabits per second to the home. And, you know, I thought I was talking about big numbers when I was going to say a terabyte's drive of info in about 15 minutes is pretty impressive, but 40 zettabytes of information makes 10 gigabits seem really insufficient. So, rather than really talk about the future, I want to get you excited about the future, and the best way to do that is to show you. So we do vision videos. I'm going to share one with you right now to really set the stage for why I think it's important to secure the future.
Come on, Cookie. I don't know how you're supposed to feel at 86, but I don't think I feel like I'm 86.
Surprise!
People make my world go round. I fear isolation and being cut off. If I am alone somewhere and I had no one to talk to, no one to share anything with, I bet you I would just dry up and blow away. I call this my smart house. We got sensors in all the rooms. I swallow them. I wear them. Doc knows what's going on with me. I don't have to go to the clinic anymore. I call him up. He's not back in the horse and buggy days.
Looks like you had a pretty active week, huh?
I'm feeling it too.
Hey guys, how do you like your ride?
Knowing I got eyes on me gives me the confidence to keep me being who I am, doing what I want to do. Frees me up. Takes the worry away. I don't have to worry about Paige, my daughter.
Hey kiddo, what's up?
I'm just checking in.
Because I know she's not worried about me.
No, I'm...
She's always busy, work and kids. But she can see exactly how I'm doing.
I love you, Dad.
That she knows how I feel before I do. Cookie has become my buddy.
Time for your pill, Jim.
My wingman. Hey, Cookie, what time is that car going to be here?
2 minutes. It's cold out. Might want to bring a coat.
It's like he has a brain. Now, what are you doing, Cookie?
It's a quick...
I have come to rely on him. I know I can trust him, and he's got my back. I lost Ellen, my wife, 10 years ago. So many good times, so many memories. Losing her was really tough. If we had had for her then what we have for me now, she would have been in a much better place. I miss her so much. Here, not too long ago, I was experiencing those dizzy spells. The doctor had provided a scan for me at home, so I didn't have to go out to the clinic or anything.
They have those scans for that patient. You want to take a look?
And that scan revealed that I had an aneurysm. I saw this specialist, a surgeon, and she explained to me we wouldn't have a messy operation. They inject these nanobots and they go into your system.
Basically, we're going to send in an army of nanobots at the aneurysm.
And they find where the aneurysm is and
Fixing it.
they seal it off. I get a kick out of thinking that I have a whole bunch of nanobots swimming around up here in my brain, doing what they're supposed to do. I wasn't in a hospital. I was back home.
Oh dear.
I was back home where I want to be, where I belong. The help that I have allows me to stay here in my home. Who is that? Do you remember? The guy in the back.
Who is that?
Have my friends here,
That's Pete.
my family, and I don't want to give that up. I don't want to be in a nursing home. The quickest way to lose your independence is to go where you don't have any independence. That's the truth.
Technology really has the power to make you feel. It really matters. It has impact. How many people have seen that video for now? I know there's at least one, a few. So the actor in this video is Rance Howard, father and Ron Howard. I think he did a much better job than I could about saying why this stuff matters. I think hard about this video. I love dreaming about what can be. I'm actually an optimistic security engineer. I might be the only one you ever meet. And I like the video because it's almost science non-fiction now. It's becoming real now. There are companies with actual intellectual property and business plans for nearly every technology that was shown in that video. Those buses are real. They're being trialed in cities right now. The scanner is real. Right? These are things that broadband is making happening now, and I think that's cool. But I'm a security engineer, and this makes me ask questions about my job. I get to look at great stories like this and then ask questions that nobody wants to have asked, all right? And how many people, I'll give you an example, how many people noticed the specialist, the neurosurgeon, was able to manage Jim's nanobots remotely? People notice that? A few people? I'm gonna copy something that one of the previous speakers said. We're gonna access a networked army of robots in people's brains remotely. What can go wrong? All right? I ask the questions that makes innovators uncomfortable and sometimes pretty mad. Today, the questions I want to answer, though, are, is the future worth securing and why? What does it mean to be secure and what needs securing? And how do we do the security thing? We're all technologists in here, at least most of us are. And a few weeks ago, I was listening to a contractor, Joseph Benavides of Amdocs, talk about a new technology, and he said something that made me stop cold. Technology development is all about people. Now, I might be up here only shaking a little bit, but I'm a seriously introverted security engineer. Optimistic, but introverted. I focus on things and problems. I focus on the technology. And it's hard for me to remember that technology is about people and giving them great experiences in their life. It's about using technology to help people make the most of every second. And that's what Rance Howard demonstrates so well for us in the video. Technology is a major contributor to making our future a better place, and it's worth putting some real effort into protecting it. Let's look at this a bit deeper. Technology is about people, and people are about interactions and experiences. Airbnb and Uber are so transformational not because of technology. Their technology is just average. It's no big deal, all right? They're transformational because of the connections they enable. These are not anonymous experiences. They are connections with people, and it allows us to focus on the moment and get someplace to sleep for the night, a friendly place to sleep. It allows us to meet somebody and get a ride in their car, really simply. That's why they're a big deal. The problem is, when a hacker hijacks a device or a service, they change that experience. They change the experience. All this cyber stuff is about who gets to own that relationship and who gets to control the experience that's happening on. This is a fundamental aspect of cybersecurity that experts, analysts, regulators, and lawmakers are missing. They don't get it. And when hackers unite, they actually create little businesses that turn into industries that hijack other industries. This isn't just this one little off thing, all right? It's industries attacking other industries. They subvert our credit ranking systems so they can sell private information for phishing. They steal and distribute movie content in direct competition to studios and broadband companies that are trying to help us have better lives. And they coerce hospitals to pay ransom by encrypting vital patient information. Hackers are real, they impact us every day, and you may not even know it. And so I need your help. My abstract promises to share 3 ways to protect our future, and we're going to do that. But I got to be honest, my prescriptions are really simple. They're not necessarily obvious, and they may make some engineers and professionals uncomfortable, which to me means the great professors, teachers, researchers, and students here at CSU might just get really excited about them. And I figure this is the right crew to help the world think out of the box when it comes to cybersecurity. 3 things. First, we need to change discussion about cybersecurity. We need to shift the discussion from security controls and compliance to discussion about enabling awesome user experiences. Security is about the experience. Build slides. Remember to do the builds. To do this, we need to embrace conflict, to accept that we're in a fight. We have to accept that any useful device must be exploitable. Now think about that. If you want to be able to use the device remotely yourself, then somebody else might be able to use it. It's an axiom, all right? There has to be some vulnerability if you're going to connect the device. And as a consequence, we have to accept that they must be exploitable, and so we need to shift our toolbox from trying to make things perfect security to rather focus on making attacks expensive, not impossible. And because of this change in perspective, I want us to get drastic. I want us to throw out the phrase security engineering together. All right, all together, make it go away. If I ask every person in this room what security means, doesn't matter how experienced you are, how old you are, what you've done in your past, I'm going to get a different answer from every single person in this room. The internet's existed for over 30 years, and I'm going to get a different definition for what just a simple term security means. So our vocabulary is failing us, and I want us to use a new phrase. Rather, let's call the work we do to secure our connected future adversarial engineering. The connected products and services we develop, that you are going to develop, will continuously be under attack. It's axiomatic. Everything we connect will always be under attack. And we need to embrace this conflict as engineers from a point in which our devices and services are designed. From the absolute first day you come up with the idea, no service or product in the future should exist that is not designed to be secure. And security means it's going to deliver the experience you intended. Not something else, just the experience you intended. How? All great design starts from the point of securing the experience you intend to deliver while realizing there are adversaries out there that want to hijack your code, your infrastructure, your customer, and deliver a different experience. We need to focus on making attacks expensive, designing architectures that are fault tolerant, have our industries collaboratively develop solutions to combat the hacker industries. They're working together, we need to work together too. And never assume our controls work. Continuously validate our practices and tools. I want you to remember this phrase. You need to use it as a guiding principle in your approach to systems design and engineering, because everything's going to be connected. There isn't anybody who works at this school that isn't going to be using connected devices. Regardless of what you do at CSU or later, consider yourself an adversarial engineer. So many of our technologies are about the fabled Internet of Things. I hate this term. I've always hated this term. I absolutely despise it. It really misses the point. The point is Metcalfe's law. The effect of telecommunications network is proportional to the square of the number of connected users of the system. Another way to say that, the more devices that are on the network, the more valuable the network's going to be. The connected world that is going to make our future so awesome is about how are we creating so many pervasive, distributed autonomous systems using these things we call Internet of Things. It's the autonomous systems that's the thing that's making the difference. For healthcare, transportation, entertainment, it's changing how we do all these things. And it's the various manifestations of the autonomous systems that's really at the core of what will help us live longer, more productive, more fun lives. As I work on broadband and healthcare, I'm finding, however, a consistent and troubling common theme amongst many of the technologies that are out there. From Bitcoin to IoT to new models for video distribution, there's one huge missing element that makes implementing pervasive and consistent security difficult, and that's an awareness of identity. All fundamental security controls succeed or fail first based on how well they can assert identity. What's one of the first things your parents taught you? Your little person, 3 or 4 years old, first things your parents taught you, don't talk to strangers. That's what identity is about. Identity is our basis for trust. How strongly we believe in a represented identity determines how much we're willing to tell somebody and how much we're willing to trust that person. So why in machine systems do we continue to invent environments in which devices have no identity? We just expect the machines to trust every other machine we or they decide to talk to, and then expect magically that they will never be exploited by other machines. Machines lie just like people do. The openness, ladies and gentlemen, is the primary reason, this type of openness is the primary reason the internet has been so valuable, but now is also why it's so vulnerable. In the evolving cybersecurity world that all these autonomous systems creates, the consequences are now too high for that to continue to exist. Right? We're talking about environments now where the car you're driving is networked. The stuff that's tracking your health and maybe maintaining your health is networked. We need to have pervasive, strong identity. Devices are centric in these architectures, and both people and machines need to make trust determinations on on how to connect and do these things. There's a lot of science that needs to be applied to learn how to create networks of autonomous systems that do not replicate the mistakes of human social networks. There's a lot of models that say copy what we do. That's not the right model. You don't know if you can trust me. I know that you can't, but you don't know. The combination, and I want to be clear about what I mean by identity. It's the combination of unique public identifiers, so you can recognize it, a secret that's only known to that device or person, and some type of attestation that allows a cryptographic challenge of identity. Now, I've been talking about devices. People have a role here too. We need to have better ways of letting devices know who should be allowed to use them. Passwords have been used widely because they're the only thing that has worked, but they haven't worked well. We need better processes that don't rely on people and don't think biometrics, and I don't think biometrics are the right approach, or certainly not the only approach. And I don't have time to go into that today because I know that probably develops a lot of interest from this particular audience, but suffice it to say, you can't revoke your face, you can't change your fingers, and you can't replace your eyes, all right? Once they're burned, they're burned. And if we can't protect basic password databases, why would we think the databases that hold biometrics are safe? One last thing. I think I'm actually on time, which would be amazing. There's one more huge gap. The security used in cable-based broadband systems has worked, believe it or not, really well for 20 years now. And it's relied on one domain of cryptography that entire time. Now, there's been advances, but we've relied on one thing for about 20 years. And cryptography tends to evolve on a 7-year cycle, driven largely by processes at NIST where they identify gaps, call on solutions to fill those gaps, evaluate the solutions, select the best, and then develop validation programs to ensure implementations are sufficient. That's why it takes 7 years. That's a big, long sentence. It takes almost 7 years to say it. Developing new cryptography is not the gap. We excel at developing crazy things to keep secrets, and some of them may even work. The gap is that we need architecture, systems, and protocols that can iteratively accommodate new cryptography. Think about the autonomous system in terms of our legacy of technology. How often do you think we're going to replace smart refrigerators, light switches, and thermostats? The average length of time for those devices in a home is 12 to 18 years, all right? A lot longer than 7 years. How old is your car right now? I bet you a lot of you have cars that are older than 7 years. Do you want to replace these things every time we need to upgrade our security? Probably not. What we need is a a response to ecosystem scale needs of trust in cryptography. We need to range solutions that we apply appropriately to the risk of the performance needs of specific applications, and we need to intelligently respond to quantum computer-based cryptanalytics. So the summary, there are 3 things I want you to remember. My name's not one of them. Fight the hackers, embrace conflict. Solve the identity crisis, and develop an extensible and evolvable cryptography solution. Now, at this point, you might think, awesome, Steve seems like he's really on top of this stuff. I'm not. And this problem is way too big for one engineer or one company. So, I'm just going to leave it here with you guys. And this is the place to leave this. You already have the largest group of students interested in cybersecurity in this state. I think that's really important. And there's going to be more questions in the future. The scientists and engineers here at CSU are going to have the answers. And since you are now adversarial engineers, I hope you have some good questions for us in a little bit.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Esty Beck from the University of Texas, Arlington. Esty's a colleague and a researcher who examines social media networks, and she's here to talk a little bit today with us about psychometrics and the future of what that looks like for the spaces that we use to engage in social activity online.
Thank you. I first want to thank the Planning Committee and also Jeff Holmes and ISTEC for the invitation really to speak here today. I am absolutely delighted to talk about this content today because this is in the news with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook surveillance. But in order for me to provide a future vision at the end of the talk, about where we might be for five years from now. I need to take some time looking at historical and then current events to explain the future vision part. So I hope you'll indulge me. All right, so in 2008, Cambridge University accepted Michael Kaczynski for doctoral study at the Psychometrics Center. And this is the largest psychometric center in the world. And psychometrics, you can think of this as the testing for like IQ test and also the kinds of tests that employers do when they want to examine your behaviors and your beliefs about things. And Kaczynski, as soon as he entered Cambridge University, he teamed with a fellow doctoral student, and they launched a Facebook application in 2009 called My Personality. And this app allowed people to answer questions along the Big Five personality. Is anybody familiar with this, the Big Five personality? Okay. All right, so the Big Five personality, it sorts people into 5 spectrums, and you can recall this by the acronym OCEAN. So O for openness, C for conscientiousness, E for extroversion, A for agreeableness, and N for neuroticism. And so when they developed this app on Facebook and they put it out in 2009, they really thought that just a few friends or colleagues would take the app and then the app would be no more. However, they did not anticipate how many people would share the app across Facebook, nor how much data they would actually collect from people. So at the end of the questionnaire, they had a notice that said, they asked the participants if they wanted to share their Facebook data. They said they were Cambridge University researchers to provide an air of credibility. And so people began sharing their data, and the app was around for a few years, and in 2012, they realized that not hundreds and not thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions of people had taken the personality test. And they saw that what they could do is they could correlate the data from the Big Five personality to the Facebook data and make some pretty eerily accurate predictions about people. So according to 2 Motherboard reporters who broke the story in January of 2017, The correlations included men who liked on Facebook MAC Cosmetics were probably more likely to be gay, or those who liked the Wu-Tang Clan on Facebook were probably heterosexual, and those who followed Lady Gaga on Facebook were probably more likely to be extroverts. But they also were able to drill down and see people's like their political beliefs, their intelligence, and they could even predict drug use with the information. So around 2014, an assistant professor in the psychology department at Cambridge University approached Kaczynski about this application and really about the methods of the correlation. And he was approaching Kaczynski on behalf of a company. And I think through months-long discussion and probably feeling like he wasn't going to get adequate remuneration for his work, Kaczynski ultimately backed out of the deal. But he must have disclosed enough information to this assistant professor about how the methods work and how the app worked, because Assistant Professor Alexander Kogan, who has been in the news over the past few weeks, he in turn created his own personality app. This is Your Digital Life. And he collected data, and then he took that data set and he sold it to Cambridge Analytica. Now, around the time that Kaczynski and Stilwell launched the My Personality app in 2009, Facebook began to realize its potential for generating millions, and then in a few short years, billions of revenue. And for the first time, they introduced language and geographical ad targeting for advertisers to be able to go ahead and implement and create and maintain their own ads. So companies like Apple and PepsiCo and Walmart, they were able to begin advertising pretty widely on the platform. But so did smaller businesses and scam artists who would create advertisements such as, "Are you an Eddie Izzard fan? We need 100 music lovers to test and keep the new iPad." And through what became known as Facebook Business, advertisers would target their ads through the demographics that people populated in Facebook and or what they liked, the content. And especially they would target along demographic lines such as somebody's marital status, if they recently changed it, or their geographic location. So for example, if a person announces a recent engagement, they'll all of a sudden start seeing advertisements perhaps for a vacation hotspot. Or ads might pop up, depending on age and sex, for hair growth treatments for women to use castor oil, or makeup tips for boomer women. So for the Facebook team, vetting credible and authentic advertisements before they're pushed out on the platform, I think didn't, and still to a degree doesn't really matter all that much because of revenue, because they rake in billions of dollars of revenue every year. But also the premise that Facebook users would, through crowdsourcing labor, report any ads that did not belong to the network under the terms and conditions of the site. So by the time Cambridge Analytica came along for the 2016 presidential election, the firm understood that they could push out messages at an unprecedented rate on Facebook with no internal oversight or approval by the social media company. And in effect, Cambridge Analytica did get away with sending any targeted messages they wanted to millions of people. And I think last reported I saw on Tuesday, it was upwards of 87 million people affected by this. So right now, Cambridge Analytica, this is a screenshot of Alexander Nix, the current suspended CEO, it trends in news reports, and with revelations each day about their methods and their nefarious beliefs about winning at all costs by disregarding U.S. election laws, which prohibit foreign actors from influencing the election. The foreign firm manipulated the information diets of millions of Facebook users to sway an election. Now, media manipulation, this is not a new concept. This has been around for long before the internet came along, but it is definitely a method for disinformation campaigns, and it is spreading in the information ecosystem at an accelerated and an alarming rate. And a challenge over the next 5 years will be addressing disinformation campaigns and the fake news plaguing the internet. Because of the surveillance state with so many websites and apps collecting data and analytics, if it's not Cambridge Analytica in the near future, it will be another firm. It'll be another organization. It'll be another nation-state actor, i.e. Russia, that will perform this kind of media manipulation. And I suspect it will only increase in 5 years if active measures are not put in place to stem the tide. So, I was looking at the talks later today about virtual reality and augmented reality, and it would not surprise me if in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, when augmented reality becomes very mainstream, if somehow then advertisers and then those who wanted to manipulate messages in some way would infiltrate AR. And then thinking earlier about what Lee said about technology receding into the background, then people perhaps not really critiquing what is happening in those kinds of environments. Now, the public still does not know necessarily all of the specifics or all of the details about Cambridge Analytica, but we do know a few things. And there's this is a really great video, if nobody has ever seen this one, by BBC Stories, put out last year. And it was the interviewer interviewed Teresa Hong when she was the director of Trump's digital campaign. And the interviewer asked her about the secret sauce of how Cambridge Analytica pulled off what they did. And he asked specifically if they used psychometrics for targeting. And she declined to really answer the question. She said that was their secret. But the group she did disclose that they targeted groups in states based on certain attributes. And so what is known about the targeting, is the scale. And this quote comes from Easy Lepowski's Wired article and her reporting that really talks about how many ads were running during the election, all of the variants. So I'll just read this off very quick. Quote, Cambridge Analytica took full advantage of the ability to perform massive tests on its ads. On any given day, the campaign was running 40 to 50,000 variants of its ads, testing how they performed in different formats, with subtitles without and static versus video, among other small differences. On the day of the third presidential debate in October, the team ran 175,000 variations, end quote. That's staggering, it very much is, yes. Now, the success of the ad variants connects to a well-known manipulation tactic used by problem actors online, amplification of misinformation. And so the viral nature and amplification of provocative posts by both humans and bots disrupts honest and faithful accounts, and then also accurate reporting of events. And so we have this example here from Eric Tucker, who shared some images of buses in Austin to say this is anti-Trump protesters being bussed in. And he had a relatively small Twitter following when he tweeted this. This particular tweet got over 16,000 shares on Twitter and over 350,000 shares on Facebook. And even after he was called out for reporting inaccurate and misleading information, he did not want to delete the tweet because he enjoyed the popularity that he was getting from the viral nature of this tweet. Now, for those conservative outlets like Robertson Family Values and Free Republic and Joe the Plumber that shared this fake news story, the goal of it was to reinforce what's called motivated reasoning. And motivated reasoning is when people are presented with narratives that confirm their very strong emotional beliefs. And so they continue to look for information that reinforces that. And any counter narratives that overwhelmingly present evidence to the contrary of those beliefs, people will tend to ignore those or downplay those, because the narrative does not initiate a level of arousal to satisfy and enhance the underlying emotions. So Cambridge Analytica, they did ultimately take advantage of a system of mass surveillance, or Facebook, to play on users' motivated reasoning with a range of personalized ads called from data points from the platform. And the surveillance apparatus, along with mediocre to non-existent Facebook security policies, allowed Alexander Kogan to create a personality app that initially had, I think, approximately 280,000 participants or 250,000 participants. And because of backdoor access through Facebook Graph API, he was able to get his hands on millions of accounts on Facebook. And then he took that data set and then in turn sold that to Cambridge Analytica, where they then in turn launched their 40 to 50,000 ad variants a day to play on people's motivated reasoning to either suppress the vote or to swing independent voters to vote for the conservative candidate. But I think there's an even larger problem besides Cambridge Analytica, and that problem is how companies like Facebook consider consumer privacy. So I'm the privacy advocate talking about, some of the humanities person about how privacy needs to be really reinforced online. So this past Tuesday and Wednesday, Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress about Facebook and its role in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And during the conservative Republican Senator Orrin Hatch's allocated time to ask questions, he presented a narration. And he gestured that he thought that the larger problem with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal was a lack of transparency. A lack of transparency in the terms and condition statements to inform consumers about all of the data that was available to third parties. So I think most of us in this room know that we do not have the luxury of time nor the inclination to read through all of the terms and condition statements and all of the privacy policies for every website and app that we do, that we take on. But to take Hatch's point, though, transparency is really only one aspect of a larger debate about surveillance and about privacy and about data collection. And I think if we want to talk about privacy and why it matters, then we need to return to fair information practices. Now these right here, these 5 fair information practices came first from a FTC recommendation report for privacy online in 1997, when the FTC, after a series of 2 years of public workshops and talking with industry experts that were primarily actually in insurance and banking at the time, from those industry experts, they advocated they did not want regulation. They wanted time to adopt these kinds of recommendations. And so the FTC suggested or highly recommended to industry to adopt these 5 principles. Notice and awareness, so those are the terms and condition statements. Choice and consent, so we check the box, but then we also choose whether or not we're going to participate in the policies of the website and app. Access, so consumers should actually be given access to the data that a website and app collects about them. Integrity and security, so security really making sure that the data is not abused or broken into or released to the public. And then the final one is enforcement and redress. And I think today that most websites have really adopted 3 to 4 of these key principles, except for the last one. And Facebook is the perfect example of this. This last one, enforcement and redress, has really allowed companies like Facebook and Google to write the rules that govern online behavior today. And without true enforcement or redress, how can companies be held liable for data abuse or for lax policies and oversight or for data breaches? And so Congress has been slow to respond to passing legislation that would offer regulations for consumer privacy or to strengthen that for consumers here in the United States. So what do we do? I'm going to talk a minute about why data privacy matters before I answer that question. So whenever we go online, whether it's through our mobile phones, our tablets, or our desktop computers, we risk our privacy. We are vulnerable. We risk losing control over both our visible and our invisible digital identities. So our visible identities, those are the ones that we control by what we enter in drop-down boxes, click and radio buttons, put in fields about our demographics. But the invisible digital identities, we do not control those. Those are generated by Google, by Facebook, by Amazon, by Netflix. And they surveil us, and they track our movements online, and they use that information to place us within categories for easy management, to deliver advertising or other content-based services. But there is benefit to this, of course. I mean, personalization does provide us with an ease of access and also with benefits. But why data privacy matters? So if we mask our IP addresses and we implement do not track technologies on our devices and we use VPNs to connect, we can somewhat reduce our privacy, risk for privacy invasion. But data privacy also matters because it limits the power that companies have over our personal data and our invisible digital identities. And the reason that Cambridge Analytica was so effective in their digital political campaign is the use of Facebook's existing advertising platform, and because they left open their API so that third parties could have a treasure trove of data. So even though people consent to data collection during the sign-up process and continue to agree to the terms and conditions while they're using the websites and apps, we don't necessarily know how companies really use our data. Sure, that's outlined, and we understand that in an abstract sense, but we don't know really who they share the data to, or how they share the data, or how much profit they're making from the data. That's just an unknown for us. And because Cambridge Analytica's a success, data privacy matters even more because we need to limit persuasive and targeted propaganda campaigns online. And we've already seen evidence of this from a study conducted by a Facebook researcher with a faculty member and a graduate student, where they polled approximately 700,000 Facebook users who, it was actually without their consent, was not written in terms and conditions at that time that Facebook researchers could actually perform this kind of empirical research. But they wanted to know if emotional contagion was a possibility. So they manipulated the news feeds. So for people who saw more negative posts, they found that people actually responded more negatively with their post. And then for people who saw more positive posts, they tended to respond more positively. So through their research, even though it was unethical at the time, I mean, there is actually empirical evidence to show just how susceptible we are to manipulation and persuasive messaging online. So we do have do not track technologies now, but there still is yet to be an industry-wide standard of practices for when a website receives a signal. Dedicated researchers, academics, and attorneys with W3C, and then also the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they are working on this with policy statements and with code, but we do need standard practices for do not track signals. But we also need regulation desperately here in the United States to keep companies accountable for internal policies that allow the company to, or third parties to, abuse data. So I leave this talk now with not a future vision, but instead, I am going to issue a call for all of the students that are here today. So when faculty and business leaders and politicians say to the next generation that we look to you for the solutions, we really do mean it, but we are also looking for you to contribute novel and innovative ideas. And for those of you that are here today from computer science and from engineering and from business, how will you use your intellectual energy over the next 5 years to find solutions to the erosion of consumer privacy online? For those of you that are here from the humanities, how will you make sure companies who do business online are accountable for any wrongdoings that they do? Thank you.
Now I have the pleasure of introducing Don Dolcinos, CEO of Smart Home and Away. We're excited to hear a little about the Internet of Things and how it might impact our lives.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jeff, for supporting this. as a cable guy, longtime cable guy, technology guy, guys like you kind of created the business that I got into and made the opportunities for a lot of us, so appreciate that. Thanks, Pete, for inviting me and also for just keeping me plugged into the CSU community. I'm from Boulder, and frankly, the CSU community is just way cooler than what other school down south. Not kidding, not just saying that. So, let's see. So, I'm going to talk about the Internet of Things, except, Steve, man, he hates the term Internet of Things. That's like, I feel bad now. Fortunately, I named the talk differently. It's Technologies of Awareness. And one of the things that's interesting to me about all the kinds of things that you can connect is it's giving you a broader awareness of your immediate vicinity, the broader community you're in, a lot of different things. And I think that's an interesting lens to look at this through. So just to get a more sense of how cool you guys really are, how many of you in the room have something like a Fitbit or a Fuel Band? Any of those things? Show of hands. Okay, pretty cool, pretty fit, guys. How many of you at home, either here or back home where you come from, have a Nest thermostat? Okay, not so many. Not so cool. How many of you have a Amazon Echo or some kind of a voice assistant that you use? That's interesting, okay. And then how many of you have a smartphone? Everybody, okay. And how many of you have a Happy Fork? Everybody, almost. That's a real thing. And it is going on 5 years old now. It's a smart fork that does one thing. It measures how quickly you move the food to your mouth. And honest to God. So the research shows that the slower you eat, the less you eat overall, and it's more healthy. So I don't have one of these either, although they're on sale for half price. And but when they add the feature that says, "Do you really need that extra piece of cheesecake?" Then I'll buy it. The lesson of the Happy Fork is that anything that can be connected will be connected. So look around the room, the chairs, the railings, anything that's not yet connected, it's going to be. And that might be interesting or it might be kind of banal, but it's happening. And one more thing. Anybody have one of these? Anybody know what that is? 3, 2, 1. Smart mousetrap. I don't want to leave this up here too. Now that it's bigger, it's kind of scaring me because of the lower right there. There's a kill chamber. Yeah, it's all right. So I could do a whole talk just showing you stuff like that, and I was tempted. But one last thing here is this is the Y Sticky, and that little kind of bronze-colored thing at the bottom there is the product. It's about 1 centimeter square. It's a sensor. It's got a transceiver. It's a connected thing that you can stick on anything. So anything that's not yet connected will be connected, and anything can be connected. So there's one of our themes for this talk. It's a very broad category. So we kind of start from the bottom of this layer. People, vehicles, buildings, other kinds of hardware, but even natural resources all can have some kind of sensor connected to them and be generating information. So all of those are connected to connectivity to wireless networks mostly, and then you build applications on top of that. So rather than go across all of these categories, I did pick 3, kind of working with Pete. So what I'll talk about are smart home, smart car, smart city, as environments where sensors are being connected, and give you a quick snapshot of some interesting things that are going on, and maybe a few predictions, 5-year predictions of what's going to happen, because I won't be back here in 5 years, and you'll never remember that I predicted those. So, and then as I go through this, and some of the examples I give will bring out some of the themes that affect how this kind of technology trend is happening, starting with the technology itself. Everything's getting, Moore's Law continues to make it easier to connect these things. There's interesting, one of the things maybe as I listen to the conversation here today, talk a little bit more about business models, because all of these devices, all the commercial devices you see, they do something for the consumer, but the business model that the company has in mind may not be just what they're trying to do to help the consumer, what the initial value proposition is. Data collection has a lot to do with that. So a lot of these are like little Facebooks waiting to happen as you go through it. I won't talk much about privacy because I think we've covered that pretty well here. There are companies trying to own this space, so there are companies trying to assemble ecosystems of devices that if you're their customer, you get access to all these devices and you can talk to them and do things. So there's these kind of battles going on. And finally, and the kind of most interesting thing to me is how these devices and the interfaces that are created work with enhancing your awareness. And there's some interesting things happen. And bad design can kill any of these devices. So let's talk quickly about smart home. And this is my smart home. And there's nothing special about my smart home, although I get braggy about it with people who aren't very technical. So I have these products. And so how many you got here? 4, 8, 9 different products. The Nest thermostat upper right there, and then the Nest Protect are designs from Nest, which is now part of Google. I love the objects. I think they're very attractive. They're extremely easy interfaces to use. Example of good design. Hue light bulbs, which is the lower right there. You know what those are? They're connected, on and off. You can set timers. They have the whole spectrum of light, so you can actually shade from red to green to blue in the bulb, which is really, really cool for about 5 minutes, and then you kind of, put them away. But I've had those for years. Don't use them. Sonos Music Player is a multi-room speaker system. That brings out an interesting thing about business models, which is and this is true really of any music service, but you sort of have your taste in music. You have a device that, now I can get music where I want it, but I don't necessarily get the music I want everywhere I want it, because Sonos has relationships with Warner Music, or is Warner Music still a thing? Yeah, it's Warner Music or Sony Music, and they might be steering you to some of those artists rather than others. And you don't know that necessarily, but boy, it's so easy to move the music to a different room. I'll do it anyway, and I'll listen to music I don't really like that much. So that kind of thing could happen. So business models, key thing. Comcast is my cable provider, but they're also in the home automation and home security business. I've got some of their motion sensors. They see that as a line extension of their business, going from video to voice to data, and now home security and things like that. And so some others. So it's also a dumb home. I'm not that braggy. But one of the big problems here is the integration. And so among those 9 devices, there were 7 different brands, and at least 4 of those things have hubs that collect other devices. So you can choose, the Nest thermostat, be able to see 3 devices. You can choose the Comcast interface and see 5 devices, including the Nest. But it's not necessarily controlling that Nest device. So it's what we say interoperable. Technically, you can see the device and connect it, but you can't necessarily control all of its functions. So interoperability is not integration, is sort of a theme I keep seeing repeated in a lot of these devices. Open data. So there's devices in my home that I don't control, right? So I have a water meter and an electric meter owned by the local utilities. The water meter is interesting because City of Boulder, and a lot of cities actually have rates where you pay a tier price, right? The first X thousand gallons is very cheap. Second 5,000 gallons is twice as much per gallon. And then the third tier really kind of goes through the roof. And they do that to conserve water, right? And so the problem is my water meter, I don't know what it does until the end of the month when I get my bill. And so I know I've used too much water and I've got that high bill. The technology exists to make that water meter smarter. The city hasn't invested in that yet. And I have no control over that. So there are institutional blockers to some connectivity would really be helpful. And so that's a kind of infrastructure problem that's out there. And then finally, there's stuff that's just not yet connected. Living in Colorado, we had that a couple of weeks ago, a storm. It wasn't snow, wasn't sleet, it was kind of slush, just kind of globs of slush hitting the side of the house. And we found out we had a leak in our window because the frame, it's a 20-year-old house, has eventually worn through and there's a leak there. I wish I could do something about that. I wish that window frame was smarter. It's going to be, right, over time. And so that'll keep that in mind. We'll get back to that as a prediction. And then finally, I left the house this morning. I was in a rush. My wife had already gone, backed out, putting my sunglasses on, plugging my phone in. And to this moment, I don't know if the garage door closed or not. Now, that said, there's smart garage door openers now. You can actually get an app that does that, but I've got a sunk investment in my existing garage door opener. So there's also financials, like who's going to come forward with a solution where, like Facebook, it's free. Here's your free smart garage door opener, and then I'll, sacrifice my privacy and my firstborn. So finally, this is my privacy slide. So this is a true thing. I have a connected printer, and I got this message not long after I plugged it in, which is, your printer told us you needed more ink. It's like, not, hey, you need more ink, or it's, your printer talked to us, and we're telling you that you need more ink. Privacy, security, Steve, help me. There's something, it's just, I don't know about you, but this unnerved me, and I'm still wondering about it, so keep that one in mind. All right, so here in the smart home category, 5-year takeaway, which is, I think there's still going to be this battle of ecosystems, and I don't see a clear winner happening. Therefore, I think the utility of a lot of these individual devices is going to be relatively limited, and the per unit sales are going to go down, I think. However, there will be the occasional killer app and the one thing you've got to have, and those will pop out. But so that's a little counterintuitive to the message that everything's going to be connected eventually, but everything that's connected doesn't mean you'll buy it, right? So that's the difference. I think there will be a solution to my leaking window in terms of predictive intelligence about infrastructure, and this is something that's big not only around homes, but also urban infrastructures and bridges and streets that are wearing out. People are starting to figure out how to measure the condition of those elements and then predict how long until the failure, and then hopefully do something about it before it's too late. And then privacy is an issue. There are solutions out there. Interestingly, it's one of those things, is it Gibson that said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So in Europe, they actually care about privacy, and they've passed legislation about it. And so there's actually some tools about how you can manage your own privacy settings and do it in a more intuitive way. So could happen. Okay. The smart car, who wants to be in a car reading a book while you're in traffic? Okay, that's interesting. You can have my steering wheel when you pry it off of my fingers, because that's not happening. But there's arguments for that. So in the smart car area, I'm talking, I think, a little bit more about automotive transformation more generally. And so you have 4 major categories, and autonomous driving is one, ride sharing is one, the electrification, movement to electric vehicles, and then connectivity, which is more what I want to talk about here, but I'll make some predictions across all of them. On the right, you see so I own an electric car, so that's the dashboard for an app that reads the status of my car. And so that's possible because there is an open port in your car. Every car has it now, an onboard diagnostic port, which essentially is an API. It's an interface to access the information about the car and then to do things with signaling. And so that app accesses information through that port. And what that does is create some interesting business models as well. I think most of you probably have heard of the progressive, there's a little module they put into this port, and then if it senses that you've driven well, it lowers your insurance rates, right? So how many of you have done that? Okay, not so many. I want my son to do it, and then I thought, no, I don't want my son to do that, because we're already paying enough in the insurance as it is. But traffic and navigation is an interesting application here. My garage door is still obsessing me here, and the garage door is interesting because there's solutions around what actually having the car just talk directly to the garage door and take me out of the loop. And just, I'm a quarter mile away from home, you can close the garage door now, or I'm approaching, open the garage door, those kinds of things. So cars are getting smarter. So what's going to happen in 5 years? None of you will be reading a book driving your car because of this. There was a fatality, does everybody know this? There was a fatality, a driverless car with a person in it, but not driving the car, and someone died. And up until that point, as part of my consulting business, I've been talking to people in Detroit where a lot of the responsibility was left to the manufacturers of the cars to figure out the safety element, and the U.S. Department of Transportation was sort of hands-off. I think that era is over, and they're going to be a little more careful. On the rideshare side, how many Uber users or Lyft? Anybody use those? Okay, so keep your hand up if you use those, and then take your hand down if you also own a car. So most of you. So I think there's going to be slow growth here. I think the enthusiasm is going to level off because of that statistic. One of the big things proponents say is ride sharing is going to eliminate traffic problems, and it's not. There's going to be just as many cars on the road, and there's going to be as much ownership of cars, so that's not going to solve the problem you think it's going to solve. But there are some interesting things that it will do. The city of Centennial is hiring Uber to pick up people, to shuttle them to the light rail station, because the light rail station parking lot is always full. And so there's kind of little interesting multimodal kinds of opportunities there. The economics of electrification are compelling. That's going to happen. Most cars will be electric within 10 years. 5 years, I don't know. And the big problem is dealerships. Most dealerships, car dealerships now, make most of their money from service and repairs, and electric cars have no moving parts, so that business goes away, and they know that. So in the interest of time, just needless to say, a lot of applications around cars, but what's interesting to me, and the last thing I'll talk about is the smart city. So now you talk about instrumenting an environment where these cars are moving through. So you have the initial application where one car talks to another to make sure they don't crash, but there's an environment and there's a city that it's moving through, and that city is instrumented as well. So there's buildings, streets, highways, but there's also the kind of the natural environment. And so there are sensors now that measure a lot of elements that you can see here, air, water, temperature, and communicate that back. There's a lot of interesting applications in to take that data, analyze what's happening in a city, and come out with interesting approaches or solutions. I'm hoping that, where's our next speaker, is going to talk about that in some detail. The progress of turning data into mapping and using that as a policy tool is growing by leaps and bounds. So very interesting. Healthcare is another piece of that. And then what I guess I propose here is if you instrument the city enough and make that interface open enough, then people can come to that with different interfaces that they want to use, but the city itself is the platform that you're developing on top of. And so sort of an open data environment is going to be really important. The way that Boulder does not make my water data available, that has to stop happening. So I think the 5-year thing there in the smart city world is urbanization is not going away. Actually, it's going to accelerate in the next 5 years. A lot of smart city things happening today. There's big press releases about Denver actually recently hired Panasonic to do a huge systems integration of a new smart city. It was mostly press hype, and I was kind of skeptical. But as I think about, can you have a common platform? Who's going to be responsible for that? The city's not going to sort of operate a software platform, but maybe Panasonic would. And maybe the city just provides the governance and the privacy guarantees and whatever else needs to happen there. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting. 5 years out, there will still be corruption and sweetheart deals in cities, because it's just the way it goes. Maybe a topic for next time, but the design here, all of these things have interfaces. Your phones, you interface to a lot of applications, but there's a lot of things that's not good at. And so there is an interesting trend developing around brain-computer interfaces, and for various applications, including at the lower right there, EEG kinds of devices that are at now consumer price points. So suddenly that's a mass market device, and that's got an interesting set of applications that probably are coming soon. Elon Musk, just because you have to mention Elon Musk in a presentation, is on this. And so all things are now computers, so now you have an interface to these things as well. So, in summary, anything that can be connected will be connected, and anything can be connected, and the real question is, how connected do you want to be? So, thanks.
Now I have the pleasure of inviting Shannon McIlvaney of Wizard up to speak with us about digital mapping and what it will mean for us as we move into the future. Thank you.
Well, the talks today have been incredible. It's great to see these parallels and how things fit together when you pull together this diverse, group of people that speak. So the future of digital maps, now, or digital mapping, it's kind of a misnomer in a way, because what we're really talking about is geospatial technology. And geospatial technologies encompass digital mapping, which is one of the big trends now, is digital transformation or the digital twin, whether it's mapping the entire Earth or it's all the mechanics and CAD around a building, for smart buildings, or it's about vehicles and parts and pieces. And so this digital transformation is occurring. For 50 years, GIS has been evolving, but so have all the technologies that go around that. So I'm going to speak more to the trends regarding geospatial technology. And I think it's the right button. So the first thing I'd like to say is I don't work for the CIA. And this comes from the fact that whenever I try to tell someone what I do, they just walk away going, what? And my brother goes, I asked, if you ask him, he'll go, I think he works for the CIA or something. And it really has to do with some of the first images we ever saw, and this is from Patriot games. And in 1992, which is around the time of the Gulf War, and then the second Gulf War shortly after that. But it was one of the first times that people, just normal people, saw what the mystery was behind digital mapping. In this case, it's digital maps, it's thermal sensors, it's real-time sensing of the environment in this desert scene where they fly in and kill people on the ground and they can see what's happening. And it's all done from these operation centers. And that stuff of spies is what's available today for everybody to use. And to start, I want to talk about GPS, which is a significant part of this geospatial technologies. And so now GPS is on everyone's phone. You take it for granted. And thanks to Apple phones and to Google Maps and all of that, this is now part of our day-to-day life. For me, when I started in 1992, I had to go out at like 2 in the morning because there wasn't enough satellites, and if I wanted to get a fix on the ground, I only used a small number of satellites, and you could hardly do it. But it's evolved from trying to find, for military, for a submarine popping up in the middle of the ocean and being able to locate itself. Before GPS, it would take somewhere upwards of 11 hours for it to know where it was on the Earth before it could do anything. So GPS helped find these, and it helped with smart bombs as well. At this time, when I started doing GPS, the surveyors had 40 pounds of equipment that would help them map a point in the ground. I had a 10-pound backpack that I'd carry, and I could do all kinds of environmental work and map cave systems and do all kinds of work. And that was in 1994. 1995, the full constellation was up. And today, there's backpacks for bees. So you can now, with tweezers, put GPS on the back of a bee, and you can watch it fly from, its hive to its favorite flower patch. You can even map where it goes, and then you can map also the bee that's eaten some pesticides. And it's like a drunk driver. It actually goes off course, it can't get back to the hive, it takes a long time, they become inefficient, they become sick, but you can now track bees. But why is this important? Now, it's this miniaturization of GPS that's leading to this incredible expansion of geolocation services. And some of what we've talked about today with privacy and the tracking of humans, because most of you are all being tracked, unless you turn your phone off or leave it at home or pull the battery out. And the question was asked about the Fitbit or maybe an Apple Watch. Now these small, tiny GPS devices are on your wrist. The Fitbit, I've got a good example here. This is just an image of Kandahar, where I don't know if any of you read, but suddenly they were publishing the locations of all their workouts. The military servicemen and women mapped all these secret bases around the world, and they got published accidentally because they forgot they were connected to the internet. So it's pervasive. But what's happening today, and what will happen in the next 5 years, there's beacons you'll start to see these things. So beacons within a store, which will track your movement throughout a store. It'll know where you go. Focal clustering, it'll know what you're looking at, what you're paying attention to, what's attracted you into the store. Geofencing, which is kind of like a fence or like a dog collar, one of those electronic dog collars to keep you in the yard. It'll know when you're near the store. It'd be great because if I had one of those, then I could remember to get milk when I pass by Safeway. Event marketing, it'll remind you, someone will be able to tell you, hey, there's an event happening downtown, we know you like this, you go to that. Instant check-in at Safeway, instead of a card, you can just check in and get your groceries at the discounted rate. And even weather-based, like geolocation services. Walgreens will be able to say, hey, remember, do you have your suntan lotion? It's a hot day today. So some of this could be rather bizarre and rather invasive, and you're already starting to see some of this happen, but it will start to happen more. It's been talked about for, 10 years or 15 years. It really hasn't taken on, but I think that it is going to now, just with all the technology that we see today. And yes, you'll be able to track your cat. This cat doesn't look particularly happy about being tracked, and you won't be able to find it if it gets in a box or a drawer, because the GPS satellites will not be able to find it, and so they still can have their mysterious life. But we see the same thing with the evolution of lasers. So in 1964, the Goddard laser revolutionized the tracking and measuring of objects in space. And it was pretty amazing that they were able to build this back then. And from as far away as 600 miles to measure within 10 feet a moving object in space. Now, that same technology today, it improved. And it was able to start working at just a fraction of an inch, a couple of millimeters, and designed to help basically park the space shuttle on the space station. Because you can't accidentally bump the space station. The inertia of the shuttle they would crush each other and everything would blow up. So they had to have guidance systems. So today, that same type of technology has translated into what we see occurring with all of the automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles. So again, laser miniaturization, and I started working with LiDAR laser scanners. I had to buy this huge box. It was about this big. It had a server I had to set up here, and it would take 45 minutes to scan this room. It would take me 45 minutes to scan the room. I was scanning battleships and doing all this crazy stuff. And today, in a millisecond, 360-degree view of the entire surroundings. And as it's driving, the car can sense everything around it and see everything and what's moving. And what's really impressive with this, I never thought this would happen. We've gone from 2009 to they were talking about autonomous vehicles to they're actually on the road and actually experimenting. So I think we're a ways out, like you mentioned. It's more like maybe 10 years, but it really is coming. There's too many companies and too much money involved. And you've got these ecosystems of companies joining forces, like Qualcomm and Ford. They just talked about basically the Internet of Things for the city, but they've joined forces to have the vehicle-to-everything technology. So a car can talk to a person, it can talk to the traffic light, it can talk to the bicycle, and connect everything. You're going to see autonomous trucking, which has already been experimented with. What we'll really see is this planning policy changes for land use planning and parking, because you may need less parking spots if cars are picking you up like the Uber autonomous vehicles, taking you and dropping you off and going back and forth. So we could see a reduction in the need for parking spaces, things like that. And my hope is we'll see a reduction in deaths. Right now it's 38,000 people die a year from traffic vehicle accidents. 2.6 million are injured. So hopefully we'll start to see some of that go down. And yes, the senior in your family will still be able to drive, even as scary as that sounds. And but the evolution is the same in the remote sensing world. We went from scanning the Earth. 1972, Landsat was founded by USGS and NASA to image the Earth. At the time, it took 26 days to image the Earth with 30-meter pixels. Here's Fort Collins with a nice, actually infrared image, which shows you both all the blue or bluish purple, black for you, are the water bodies. The red is the burn scar from the Galen fire. And the green, of course, is vegetation. But with this type of technology, you're able to sense the environment, pull data out of it, and really understand what's going on. But remember, when this started, we had 30-meter pixels, which is like almost 100-foot, pixel. So it's, big as a football field, trying to figure out what what the Earth looks like and understand it. Today, we've got under a meter. This is 81 centimeters, so 31 inches. And you can start tracking things and see things on the Earth at resolution that was just unheard of from space. And at the time, this was stuff of spies. I would be kicked out of the room when they brought in 1 meter data, because I didn't have security clearance, so they go, you have to leave the room. But it was just 1 meter data back in 97 that they were using, and Russia had it too. But now you can see things as less than half a meter, 1 foot actually, 1 foot from space. That's amazing, 1 foot. So what you're going to see is this commercialization. Right now, you could call up and order your imagery for, and I did this on one project for Sierra Leone. It was kind of freaky, but I can make a phone call, buy imagery of a certain area, and get it delivered within 24 hours. That is crazy. But you'll have daily monitoring and change detection. You'll be able to see changes from day to day. There's an example here of farmedge.com. They use it for doing farming, so smart farming. They can look at the zones, the health, the yield, the profit, the weather, all with a nice operational dashboard to understand what's going on. You can monitor competition. I know one large grape grower that makes wine that I thought they were just going to map all of California for themselves, but no, they mapped all of their competitors as well. So they could see what they were growing, when they were growing, what was going to be profitable, and what to buy and what to change. So then with this deep stack archival imagery that you'll have tons of images, you can actually start looking at using it for machine learning and say for, in this instance in Africa, and this is a study out of Stanford, it's just published, very, very nice work. They could look at land use, in this case, thatched houses in Africa. Then they could look at tin houses in Africa, and then look at the light intensity. And you'll notice in the middle of this image here, that's Africa. There are hardly any lights in Africa. It's not just an ocean, it's that there's very little electricity there. But if you take the land use type and say the thatched, we assume the thatched roof is not some eco-hippies like me living there, but they're not wealthy enough to own a tin roof, so we can look at assets, abundance, and then compare that with light intensity and go, well, they also have no light, and we can use these surrogates to come up with a poverty indication. And remarkably, if you run this type of analysis and you train images to look for these things, you can train machines to look for and then compare and come up with this information. So, and they did it with 4 different countries, but it compared remarkably well. Everywhere else they did it with a similar culture, the numbers came out the same. People with spending $1.5 a day with the dark red versus people spending $8 a day in the green. So you'll see this happening more frequently and for more things around the world. And what you'll start to see is its use for geospatial technology. It's really the power of where things are is as important as what they are. The assets, their condition, and everything you might think about for taking care of things. So in this case, we're looking at applying location to solving business problems. The other one was social. Now I'm talking more about a business example. So it's a wind farm operations. These are all the turbine locations. And the problem we asked them was, well, what is really your pain point? What do you worry about? And they went, well, we're worried about lightning strikes. The turbines themselves are already like giant robots. They're running and they know when to turn, they know how to act and how to behave. But when there's a lightning strike, we need to find out when it happened, where it happened, and what did it take out? What do we need to fix so that all of that money, power, can get to the substation? So we said, okay, we'll bring in, this is the company I worked for before, Critigen. We'll bring in the lightning data, we'll bring in all your locations, we have tracking your wind speed, how they're performing, when a lightning strike happens, and the distance from the strike to the power outage. And we could actually calculate the distance so they could get there as fast as they could to repair it. Otherwise, they'd have to search for miles and miles to find the break. So this is one of those applications, and it can apply to all industries. Any industry can use location intelligence to help solve problems. So here is some of the technology attached to the wind farm itself. A company called OSIsoft builds sensors. And some of these wind turbines have hundreds of sensors attached to them. And SAP is a company that's a database company. And here's where all the things come together. You might have a company like Esri with GIS and the digital mapping. You'll have SAP with this incredible HANA software for in-memory data processing that's faster than regular data processing. You'll have OSIsoft, which is the sensors and the actuators and all the pieces that are informing, letting you know how things are going. Bring it all together, and you know the stresses on the wind, the turbine. You can see the red to the light blue. That's stress points from the wind. You've got the wind, that big swirly thing is the wind speed. Then you can say, these bolts are starting to shear. We need to change these out. Do we have them in supply? Yes, we do. Which technologist is available to go fix this now? And you can actually, and they're using the VR to actually communicate with everybody. And this was on stage just this last year. And that's all simulated, but what he sees in his head for the VR. So you're going to see more of this. This is cutting edge, but everyone's really going in this direction. So with great power comes great responsibility. And of course, this is Stan Lee. And, you know, does anyone remember who said this line? Any Marvel fans? Huh? Uncle Ben. Well, there you go. So do we have any prizes? Uncle Ben, Spider-Man, Peter Parker's uncle, stated this. So, and that was one of my favorite comics as a kid. But with great power comes great responsibility, and that gets with the comment about the dark side of information and accessibility and power of technology. So what I propose is that the UN has come up with these global sustainability goals. That it used to be the Millennium Project was more focused on developing countries. This is all countries. This is how we should be thinking around the world for eliminating poverty, even in our country, which we do have, and hunger and good health, and reducing inequality and improving life for people and for the environment. So maybe we should use all this technology to do good, and to try to do good, or to try to do no evil, as Google's motto, right? So number 9 of those sustainability goals has to do with infrastructure and having good infrastructure, resilient infrastructure for all people. And here's an application, and this is the company I now work for, Wizard, that looks at using data from asset management, so existing conditions, how are the pipes doing, how are the lines doing, the gas, the sewer, the storm, looking at co-location, where are they located, when are they located near each other, and then looking at external threats, so hazard mitigation plans, where's the flood, the fire, the landslide. You take all of that information and you do geospatial analysis, which in this case is kind of a simple overlay analysis that allows you to look at where do all these things occur at one place, and then you can start figuring out how to solve these problems and prioritize where to spend money in order to have that resilient infrastructure. So the goal in all these situations and the trends today are this digital transformation. We're actually looking at the entire Earth, understanding how it operates. And Jack Dangerman, the owner of Esri, he's made this comment in 1995. He said that GIS would become the nervous system of the planet. And it was really in a kind of a visionary statement. But with all of these technologies, it's not just GIS. GIS is its backbone, because you can start to look at the skin of the Earth, the infrastructure, the metabolism, how is it doing, and actually be able to do something about it. And so I think the more informed we are, once you know something, you can do something about something. If you measure it, you can do something about it. And I think all of this together, everything we've heard today, is kind of coming together and to create this kind of connected world. So that's the end of my story.
We have 3 speakers who are going to come up and help us think through the state of augmented reality and virtual reality, and what directions we might see that go in the next 10 years or so. Some of these folks are really doing innovative things in this space locally, and so we're pretty excited to have these folks. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Rudolph. the Vice President of Research here at CSU. He's been really driving our VR efforts here on campus, and so we're excited to hear what he has to say. Thank you.
So these are the Ignite sessions. I guess we're supposed to ignite in 10 minutes. I'll start the ignition, and then we'll be followed by my fellow speakers. I often get asked by my kids, how did I get involved with VR? And I think the most obvious answer is reality is really tough right now. And if you turn on the news at 6 o'clock, it's not hard to reach for a goggle or a set of AR glasses and check into what the future is really bringing us. And you know, the talks we heard earlier were great précis for what I think the three of us are going to talk about. I think I'm going to be more on the application side because our colleagues from HP and NVIDIA are driving both the hardware and the software, the algorithms. And naturally, as Vice President of Research at Colorado State, it's great to talk from the platform of a land-grant mission. Just a little bit of my history with VR. It starts actually 20 years ago. VR and AR are not a new technology. In fact, there's a lot of research out there on virtual and augmented immersive environments, and they've been used for quite some time, mostly by the Defense Department, and in fact in some industry settings where mostly around training, as you might expect the Defense Department to use it, but even in conditions for things like post-traumatic stress syndrome, in cognitive behavioral therapies, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I think Lee said nicely earlier today that the real two areas in the Pew report that came forward for VR and AR in the application space, and I'll probably spend more time on those, are in healthcare and education, both of which are, of course, very much central to our mission here at Colorado State University, whether it's dealing with the wellness and the quality of life we have, which is great here in Fort Collins and in the Front Range, and also the future platform of which we're training the next workforce to be involved with AR and VR. Actually, it's fun when you sit in the audience, you get old enough and you see slides that you started work on 20 years ago. And in fact, for me, the path started at the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency known as DARPA, which is an agency established by Eisenhower in '58 around Sputnik, and their mission is to avoid technological surprise. That mission exists today. And when I arrived as the first and I think the only zoologist to work at DARPA, and my boss used to sometimes get it wrong and say we even have a zookeeper, I would get to work on really the areas of understanding brain-machine interfaces and launch one of the first programs there. Fortunate enough to see it in animals all the way to human clinical trials, which I participate still in. And so I think just to reflect what we're doing here at Colorado State, as it was said, when I came 4.5 years ago as a first-time academician, having spent time in both industry and government, it was a great palette from which to now, with the next generation of hardware and software, to really launch into what might be the next 5 to 10 years of the future vision of AR and VR. And so let me spend the rest of the time on that and just giving you a snapshot of really what is possible. So let me start with the healthcare field, because we all know a very well-known effect in the medical profession, and certainly we have been tracking it. It's called placebo. Placebo effects are really those that are driven by the perceptive power or belief state people have about medicine. And if you track the clinical trial history over the last 20 years, the placebo effect has been rising. And why is that important? Well, the pharmaceutical industry, if you want to develop a new drug and you want to demonstrate its efficacy or its usefulness, you have to do it over a standard set of care, show that it's much better than what we have today. And if the placebo effect is starting to rise and you can't show that efficacy over a placebo effect, the FDA says, well, you know, you don't have something that you think you have. And so we've understood the perceptive power in medicine, and now we're actually using these environments to drive that. And the most powerful examples we have are ones that are driving conditions like pain. There's a program you can go out and search now called Snow World, which was developed in the Northwest at the University of Washington and commercialized. Very effective in taking kids with pediatric pain from burns or cancer and putting them into an Arctic world. And you can measure evidence-based outcomes of these kids showing reduced symptoms of pain associated with burns. The psychological and cognitive behavioral therapy areas around phobias and fears, trauma and are also being actively pursued. There are now some 75 VR healthcare companies out there now pursuing these things. So this is a very active area, and at CSU we're very active in this. We have one of our highlight programs is called Be Sharp, where we've partnered with the Fort Collins Symphony, and we have taken people with dementia in our community with their caregivers and shown that over the course of 2 symphony seasons, these people have reduced cognitive decline compared to healthy age-matched controls of the same age, age-matched controls of the same population of dementia and decline. So clearly we've known things that immerse people in healthy environments around arts and literature and music are healthy vectors in their own conditions. And now we're taking a project where we're actually going to extend this in an immersive virtual environment. We'll be filming the symphony on May 12th and creating an immersive experience. And it's really interesting to think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be doing more therapeutic storytelling. I've produced 5 VR or AR productions, and one of these actually pursues this route of trying to intercede with the psychological conditions of people using virtual and immersive environments. Now, on the educational front, there's a plethora of things we're engaged in here on campus. For those of you who visited us and coming to the conference, you've seen a lot of building around us, and the building continues. One of the building that we're putting up and broke ground on about 6 months ago, it'll be done in the fall, is a design center. And inside the design center, we'll be putting a 50-person VR theater. And I think you're going to see VR theaters popping up across the nation where there'll be content, much what we heard here today with regard to entertainment or other types of applications. But we'll be using it to really understand how the virtual environment affects learning. Now, those of us who've been around saw the introduction of the internet in the classroom, jumped up and down and declared that education was going to be transformed. And we only found out that we really had to understand learning outcomes on an evidence-based and a very rigorous basis to make that claim even about the internet. And now we have a lot of online education. So the 25 or 30 years in which that's taken place has delivered us a higher state of educational delivery. I think VR and AR is positioned well to do that. And we're engaged in that kind of activity both around our curriculum. And so Colorado State has one of the largest and oldest online campuses. It's called CSU Global. And we've started a project to actually begin delivery of curriculum through CSU Global. There's quite a bit of educational content being driven in VR and AR now. And so I think you're going to see the ability for us, and we envision in the next 5 years, to basically rent people a goggle or an AR set of glasses, and then deliver them coursework, download their course, an immersive experience. We're starting out with a liberal arts curriculum as well as a more technical curriculum. And in this earliest phase, what our intent is to really understand what is the value of learning inside that environment. And for any of you who've been inside of a virtual and augmented environment, it is amazing. It will transform you to places that you don't see. It will give you experiences you won't have and emotions that you will experience for the first time. It is a very powerful, perceptive environment. The last thing I'd leave you with in my 10 minutes of ignition is that the collaborative ethos on Colorado State campus is very high. I think this is a function of our geography being in the Front Range, but it's also, I think, the function of 300 days of sunshine. We really enjoy, I think, a very good quality of life, and that leads people to want to collaborate. We have a very high collaborative value here at campus. What's interesting about VR, and we're starting to create some spaces to look carefully at that collaborative environment, because putting on a goggle now or putting an AR HoloLens on, I can have my collaborator who may be in Europe, who may be in Asia, who may be in Latin America. I can have them in the room with me. Maybe I could even have them doing experiments with me. I could maybe have even doing experiments across campus, on West Campus, in East Campus. So we're closing the space and time for collaborative energy. And for a campus like Colorado State, which is naturally collaborative, this is a really powerful space we want to explore. And so in addition to those VR theaters, we're going to be creating some very intentional collaborative spaces to explore how can we bring people closer together and really enhance our already collaborative power here at Colorado State. So that's my 10 minutes in ignition, and I'll turn it over to one of my colleagues, and we'll come back and answer some of your questions.
Thank you. Now we have, yeah. Well, he's the distinguished technologist, so I was thinking about how to bring that up, and that's what I wanted to say. It's like, how do you get that title? It's such a cool title. So, distinguished technologist from HP, Paul Martin. Thank you for coming today.
You bet. How you get the title is you stay there too long and you're old. And I see another distinguished technologist in the audience as well, who's at the other side of HP. But, okay, let's see if I can, it also means you can't see. So, press the top button, I assume, or side button? There we go. Whoa. We went too far. Okay, so I'm Paul Martin, work at HP down the road here. I am a DT, and I work on AR and VR at HP. Lucky enough to do that. I've been doing that since I was a child. You can ask my parents. And speaking of history, I was going to go through a little history because I'm supposed to talk about the future of AR and VR. And many times looking backwards is a good way to figure out what's going to happen in the future. So there's a visual pun there, by the way. Let's look backwards. So the whole concept of artificial reality is certainly not new. Back in the mid-1800s, people were doing stereograms or daguerreotypes and taking pictures with two cameras effectively and generating stereo pairs that way. Even farther back, people, Will and I were just talking, were doing cave drawings in caves in France and, you know, an early alternate representation of reality. So it's not a new concept. It's not new again. So this is in '62. This is a guy named Morton Heilig, who was a filmmaker, and he was unhappy with the immersive quality of films at the time and decided to do something about it. So he created this amazing device, which, by the way, you can buy online for a few $100,000. It's called the Sensorama, and this amazing device, whoops, got to bounce there, gave you stereo images, stereo sound, vibrations, and hopefully uncorrelated aromas and wind. So you could sit in this thing and have a really immersive experience. So the real amazing thing about this was he actually wrote a patent on the concept of a head-mounted display that gave you stereo and gave you, imagery in space basically in front of you. And if you look at this patent written in 1960, it looks almost exactly like an Oculus Rift or a HTC Vive. So this is 1960. Technology different. Yeah, you'd have CRTs instead of OLEDs or LCDs, but basically the same concept. So a scant few years later, there's a guy named Ivan Sutherland, and that's him behind the headgear there. And he actually wrote two seminal papers. And the first was called The Ultimate Display. And this was actually basically a description of the Star Trek holodeck. So in this paper, it's only a page and a half, 2 pages long, he describes people being able to go into this room, the ultimate display he calls it, and experience alternate realities, including touch, sense of touch, taste, feeling things like wind and so forth. If you ate something that tasted good, you'd know it, etc. So very, very early thinking about immersive. And he wrote a second paper, said, well, gee, that's a great idea, but I should do something about it. And he wrote a second paper called The Head-Mounted 3D Display, and he got a bunch of grad students, which is common practice, I think, to work on this. And they actually created a head-mounted 3D display, and it looked like that. And it was fondly nicknamed this Sword of Damocles because of the menacing nature. That's actually the tracking system there above his head, and he's using an ultrasonic emitter on his head there, but he was able to wander around within a 3D environment. And it was all very, very primitive graphics, line graphics and so forth, but it was the first step. Okay, so He started the trend, and he had a bunch of grad students, people like Jim Clark, Alvy Ray Smith, Ed Catmull, that became giants in the computer graphics industry after that, and went on to create things like this. So now we have today, we have a huge variety of head-mounted displays that are less bulky and menacing. And they do various things, virtual reality, they do mixed reality, and they do augmented reality. And luckily, we have our friends at NVIDIA to create some amazing graphics cards that will drive these displays and create amazing worlds that Alan described in the various use cases he talked about. So that's kind of the state of the art today. So what does the future hold? So that's the history part. Okay, so let's extrapolate forward and what does it mean moving forward? Okay. So I think it means the same thing. I think it means that people are still trying to create the ultimate display. I think that's what he called the ultimate display. I would call it the holodeck perhaps, and so would NVIDIA, by the way. And I think that's still the goal for people, is to change their reality for some reason. Not sure why, but yeah. So there was a book written about it, and you guys have, maybe many of you have read this book. I won't ask for a raise of hands because it's embarrassing for me. But Ready Player One, Ernest Cline, I think 2013, and recently, of course, Steven Spielberg made a movie out of it. This is after he said he would never do anything with virtual reality, by the way. He actually had some demos and got religion, as it were, and made this movie. And I don't know, has anybody seen this movie, RPO? Yeah? Yeah, maybe 20% something. I saw it the other day. It's a classic Spielberg movie, pretty good movie, lots of extrapolation. Yeah, okay. So there are commercial visions about this future as well. So this is maybe an encapsulation of Microsoft's future vision about virtual and what they actually call is mixed reality. So you're in an environment and you can mix the real world with the synthetic world. And you can do things like run your favorite Microsoft apps, on subscription now. You can interact with avatars. You can interact with your friends. You can interact with AI bots and so forth, and just generally have a good time. And if it's going to be so fun, you're going to want to spend a lot of your time in there, at $10 a day or something. So that's one vision of the future. This is I had to do a shameless plug here. There's our new VR backpack, by the way. Okay. So I'll back out, there we go. So HP, we're pretty commercially oriented, and we're very focused on product design and architecture, and Will Wade, who's coming up after me, will talk a lot about those segments. So this is kind of the way we see things, that VR and AR are tools to help people get their jobs done, the workflow kind of tools, and automotive is a prime example. And speaking of NVIDIA, this is at GTC, which is NVIDIA's graphics conference, I think not this year, but the previous year. And there's a bunch of, I'll just say it, geeks with headsets on, and they're enjoying an experience called Holodeck. And this is what it looks like to us outside, but inside this great world, it looks like this. And these guys, they got no legs, that's okay, but they're able to huddle around a McLaren and comment to each other how great it looks, or if it was a different color, or if we slice through it, or things like that. So this is what's going to be happening in the very near future in terms of user interaction in VR, this kind of stuff. Okay. Okay, so what are the challenges in doing this? Well, they have to do, frankly, with the human sensory systems, right? So we have at least 5 senses. Some people say up to 20, but the obvious ones are these that you're seeing roll out here, and they're all important to really recreate reality effectively for people. The area where people have been making in industry most progress currently has been in the area of the visual aspect, okay? All the other ones are important, but frankly, people have been focusing on visuals here. So I'm going to go into a little depth on that, show you a quick video, and then my 10 minutes will be more than up probably. So, and this is apologies to a guy named Michael Abrash, who's head of VR at Oculus, or CTO there. So today, the state of the art is that the resolution of these devices is roughly what you see there, 1600 by 1400 per eye. The pixel density, so the little image elements you see in front of you, roughly 10 to 15 per degree of your vision. So 1 degree, you see about 10 to 15 of those things. Field of view is about 100 degrees, so roughly like that. And the depth of focus is interesting because it's always fixed. When I have a headset on, I don't see, if there's an object way off in the distance, guess what? It's really this far away. If there's an object right in front of me, it's that far away. Your eyes will toe in to look at the object, but your eyes will not focus. And that's a source of consternation with people, physiologists, that the fact your eyes are not changing focus really when you're looking at objects. And there's a well-known effect called the Vergence accommodation effect that kind of describes that. So if you compare what we can do today to what humans can do, it's pretty amazing. Resolution totally is about 50 to 100x better than we can display today. The pixels per degree, which is basically kind of the square root of the one to the left, is about 60 to 80 ppd, so 5 to 8x. You can actually see things more than 180 degrees around you. So humans are really good at that. You know, if the lion is coming after you, you should be able to detect it and run. And then we have variable focus as well, okay? So one of the active areas in VR right now, looking forward, is to address these issues, okay? And it turns out there's some good news. Humans with their physiology provided a backdoor for this, and it has to do with our friend, the fovea. Okay, so in your eye, there's a place where most of the information gets captured. It's called the fovea. That's the high density area. There's a bunch of other areas around it that capture shading and movement and things like that, but this is where most of the information comes. And it's, so if you focus on the fovea, sounds like a phrase, or you can actually put the information you need on the fovea and not worry about the rest of the eye. And that's called foveated rendering and display. Okay, so if you do that, you don't have to go up to 5 to 8 to 100x in terms of all the information you have to generate and display. You can actually just focus on the fovea and display it there, and you can generate realistic-looking images, okay? So, so it's kind of like this. So you got a fancy motorcycle you're eyeballing, you're looking at a particular area of the motorcycle, and this is all handled by eye tracking, by the way. So the new headsets, and you know, shades of privacy, by the way, but new headsets will track where your eyes are looking, and you can say, well, I'm looking right at the kind of gas tank area there, or the engine area, so I'm just going to render all that very clearly. The stuff around it I'm not going to bother about so much and save a lot of effort doing that, and guess what? The user will never know. And there's been a bunch of studies done here. If you do this effectively, you can render, you know, a tenth the information and nobody even knows it. So that's the rendering side. That's generating the image. The other side of this is how do you display that information now? So if you want to display very high resolution in a small area of the head mount display, how do you do that? Well, those clever Finnish people, there's a company called Varjo, based out of Helsinki. I'm saying that wrong. They've actually come up with a display that has a super high resolution display that moves around in front of your eye. So as you move your eye, it will track that and display right in front of your eye, basically. The rest of it's filled in with the low-res display, and it's like you're looking at a super high resolution picture. It's pretty amazing. So, so this is getting solved. I won't talk too much about depth of focus, the Vergence accommodation problem, but just enough to say that multiple people are looking at it, including people that have $2.4 billion of funding on the right. That's Magic Leap. So that problem will be solved as well. Okay, so with all this good stuff, what can you do? Okay, so now I have a video, and I hope it plays and has audio. So I'm not sure if the control booth can... Let's see what happens when I press go here. Nothing, okay. There's a really great video online that you should go see. Use the word siren and unreal. And this was shown at Game Developer Conference about a month ago or so. This is actually an animated character. It was real-time animated using a motion capture rig, almost indistinguishable from a human. If you've heard of the Uncanny Valley, which is this is on the almost out of the Uncanny Valley. They've traveled for years and almost made it out now. So pretty amazing stuff. So go take a look at this video online, and guarantee you'll be impressed. They also have a guy reading something out of Hamlet who turns into an alien in the middle of it, and that's also quite impressive. So. And just to show you what it took to animate this character on the left. So that's a fake character on your left, and that's the woman who's actually animating her real time. That rig is actually significantly reduced from previous versions of it and will be reduced more. So another thing that's going to happen is that being able to capture facial expressions, including eyes and cheeks and mouth and everything, that's all going to shrink down into headset size within the next couple, 3 years. And you'll be able to have collaborative conferences that Alan talked about, and you'll be able to see people that aren't avatars with randomly blinking eyes, but you'll actually be able to see people nodding and looking at you or not looking at you and things of that nature. So I think that's it. I've exceeded my 10 minutes, so what is old is new, and thank you very much.
And next we have Will Wade from NVIDIA. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. All right, so NVIDIA, why are we here? A few of you have probably heard of us. We make graphics chips that do video games really well. Some of you younger guys will know that. Some of you guys with my color hair may not know about us, but we make some great graphics chips for you CS majors that bought that graphics chip to play a game. You've smartened up and learned about this whole blockchain thing and Ethereum mining and Bitcoin mining, and you realize that the bigger the GPU you buy, the more money it spits out the back of the PC. So please keep buying those big ones and keep going. We actually have another business that we call the professional visualization business. So do we use VR in gaming? Absolutely we do. We support that. We built a Ready Player One game in VR that people can go play. It's an escape room based on the movie. It's kind of cool. But on the professional side, we do a lot of things with graphics in general and VR, and that's what I wanted to talk about here. So I want to build on Paul's history. I haven't been around as long as him, so we let him do the history part of it. And then the technology part, I'm not as smart as him, so we let him do the technology part. What I do is product management. We take that technology that gets invented by these really smart guys, and we get to go talk to people who use this stuff and have a pain point or a problem they want to solve or a need that they need to do. And that's where I get to sit. I get to bring those together. So I want to talk to you about the use cases that we're starting to see today, which over the next 5 years as a future vision, we're really going to start to see taking off. So these are some of the ones that we're starting to see, some of the customers that we're starting to work with. The big ones that are using this stuff right now in the professional space outside of gaming are the media and entertainment guys, right? Building this stuff in VR. The Ready Player One movie was actually filmed in an environment where they were in VR. The director Spielberg would come in, put on a VR headset, have a camera controller, and he would walk around the set and he would say, I want this camera angle, and not just I want this camera angle, record, here we go, okay, movie's done. Right, so VR and media and entertainment is huge, and it's going to grow even more. Manufacturing and design, big use case. Architecture, I'm going to dive into these two a little bit deeper to show you. Architecture is an easy one to get our minds around, right? If we build this room, if we build this building, there's a lot of use cases in architecture itself where we can use VR and augmented reality. Let's start with the designer in the top left there, right? You can sit at your desk, see what your design is going to be in, right? You can see the cars in relation to the building, your building in relation to the next building. If you're lucky enough to design a building in Colorado, your building in relation to the mountains that drop behind it, right? So all of that can be done in VR, and we're seeing that happen today. Design reviews. So I can take and build a cardboard model of my building, or I can put it in VR and let my client see it. And my client doesn't, by the way, have to sit here. He can sit in New York City if that's where he happens to sit, or he can sit in Shanghai, and I can share with them virtually their building and get their approval. Facility planning, once we do that, we just built a new building in Santa Clara, our headquarters. So facility planning came in after that, and our world is built around cubicles. Not to discourage you any from graduating and going out into that world, but the building planning is all about how many monkeys can we squish into a smaller space and before they get angry and kill each other, right? You can do all of that in VR, right? Construction rehearsal, it's hard to see the image here, but how do you coordinate construction? Construction sites right now are a big choreography of people and machines moving, and how do you make those interact together? If you can see that in 3D, you see that the tractor runs over the guy, or the guy runs over the other guy, right? Training is a big one. Marketing and sales. Now I've got this building in VR. My goal as the sales guy is to fill it up before construction is done, or maybe even before construction starts. How do I do that if I can't show it to them? Well, put it in VR. You can sell stuff in VR, and I've got an example of that here in a second. So this is a video of one of the architects at Canon Design, how they're using one of the tools that we built for them. This is the holodeck tool that Paul talked about that we built. You can see this is a design review with the client. So the client's actually in there. He's going to mark stuff up. He's going to measure it. He's going to give us some design ideas. These guys are collaborating, by the way, not in a room, right? They're collaborating virtually. So I don't remember their locations. The building here is actually in St. Louis. So I think the client was in St. Louis. Canon Design was either New York City or Chicago. And so these two guys are talking. The one guy's filming from his viewpoint, and the customer here is saying, I'd really like to change this back wall to a different color. And so he's got a palette there where he can change that back wall color instantaneously, right? Not going back to the designer, but the guy who's going to buy the building, the guy who's going to pay the money can actually go in there and do this, right? He can also go in, you'll see him here in a second, he's going to draw on this chair. He's not liking that style of chair, so he's going to say, what if we changed it to something like this, right? This is not a designer, this is an amateur guy who can go in there and say, I really think this, and now the designer can take and build off of that design. Okay. So that's architecture. Automotive design is another place where we're really seeing it take off. And the things that are making it take off, right, like, as Paul mentioned, this stuff's been around forever. Why didn't we design the 1960 Karmann Ghia with virtual reality? Well, it's because some of the key components didn't exist. Some of the things that are making this really take off now is physics simulation. We can do real-time physics simulation in there so that when you touch the surface of the car, you touch it. You don't just go through it. You don't just look at it. You touch it, and it runs around the edge, right? Haptics feedback is coming. We're going to be able to touch that car and feel the car, feel the edge of the car, right? Collaboration is a big one. Unless you're a kid in your mom's basement playing video games, you really do want to collaborate, right? Workers want to work together, they want to get ideas together, and when we collaborate, we get bigger ideas. And so that ability to collaborate is really coming because of the bandwidth, because of some of the things that our Mark Zuckerberg and our friends in that evil world have built for us. They've built some great collaboration tools, and we're taking advantage of those. And then physically based materials. We're able to now make materials, make a language that allows us to define a material based on its physical properties so that it can act exactly like it's supposed to act when you shine that light on it or when you shine that light through it, the physically based material. We actually compute where the light ray goes and what that light ray does. Does it reflect? Does it refract? Does it get absorbed? Does it change color, right? All of those things. So these three things are really helping us with the takeoff of VR and automotive design. Here's our Project Holodeck, or what we built to demo this out. This is a Koenigsegg. It's a sports car out of Sweden. And they're a very small company. They have a few engineers. This is about $1.5 million sports car. If you want to see one, you can come over to my place later. No, I don't have that. But what you're seeing is these engineers really working in that space. These guys don't have a lot of budget to go build 100 prototypes so they can bring them in and tear them apart and measure this and do this, paint them different colors and see what it'll look like. They don't have that capability to do that, right? So in VR, they can do this virtually. They can take the car apart. They can say, what about this? What if we stretch this out? Does the engine fit where we're thinking about putting the body panels, right? Fit and form and function are all important to these guys. Are all the parts there? Right? I need to look at the spring. He's going to pull a spring here in a minute, right? Does it fit around the strut that I'm planning to use, right? All of those things can be done in VR without having to build prototypes. So these guys are really taking off with this. Koenigsegg's an interesting example because, like I said, these sports cars are multi-million-dollar things. They just came up with a design back in September that they wanted to test out with the world. Well, traditionally, the way you do that is you go build a clay model, or you build a prototype, or you build a dozen prototypes, you put it out there, you do focus groups, you spend a year studying that focus group, you redesign it, you put it out there. They didn't have the time or the money to do that or the personnel to do that. So they went and built a virtual model of the sports car. They took the CAD data that they had designed, put it in virtual reality. They took it to the Geneva Auto Show with our holodeck project and showed it to their VIP customers. So yeah, focus group, they're getting feedback. They didn't actually just get feedback, they got orders. They took orders on a car that was only designed in virtual reality. And now, $3 million sports car, now they have to go build it. Good problem to have, right? If you're selling out a condo before it's done being built, these guys actually sold the car before it was even fully designed, right? So good use of VR in that space. Some other industries that we're seeing, hospitality, it's been talked about a couple times here, right? Movie theaters are dying, they're struggling to get revenue. What can we do next? We're working with several companies who are starting to build facilities like the Design Center here on campus, where you'll have a VR headset in every seat, or you'll have an augmented reality experience, not just in the seat, but as you walk up to it. So, you know, maybe you go to a Nuggets game and you get to a different experience than you would just sitting in the seat, right? Medical is a huge one, across many different use cases there, right? So surgeon training in VR, much lower cost than buying the cadavers that they have to buy, or the chickens, or the dead cats, or whatever they have to operate on, right? The surgical training can be done for the cost of a video game. It's literally $19.99. You can download that application and do your training, right? So now it doesn't replace everything, but it does get us a lot better, a lot further along than you typically would without it. We had a use case at our GPU Tech conference a couple weeks ago where somebody is using VR to treat autism. So not just diagnose, not just learn about, but to treat autism, where they put the VR headset on, they teach people to interact. Autism, the challenge there is interacting with other humans. They've built a game where it's designed to help kids with autism learn to interact, learn to talk with people. If I come into the restaurant and walk up to the counter, how do I order with that person? And if you do it correctly, you get a good score. If you don't do it correctly, you get a lower score. And these kids are just loving it because they love the individuality of that environment where they're by themselves, but they're interacting with what could be real people, right? So it's really teaching them. Retail, we're starting to see it, right? Not just with condo complexes and Koenigsegg sports cars, but designing shoes. We got a call the other day from the company that owns Gucci over in Europe. We got a call from a company in Chicago that owns Victoria's Secret. I don't get to work on those. We keep those out of the HR world, but a lot of these people are trying to design their product, not just design, but show it off and get feedback. Other industries, training is a big one. We're starting to see training pop up with virtual reality all over, especially around, we talked about education. Alan talked about, you know, how we're using it here. But what about firefighters who have to go into a hazardous environment? Can we train them in a lot safer way so that they can be more prepared to go in? Military obviously would be using that as well. Expensive environments, costly environments. NASA uses virtual reality to train astronauts how to fix the space station, right? If you drop your wrench because you weren't paying attention to what you were doing at the space station and it floats away, that's expensive because now you got to fly another wrench up there because there's no Home Depot around the corner, right? And robotics is a big use one. I want to talk about this one real quick. We're not just training people, we're training AI. Right? Let's use VR to train our AI. We built a robot called Baxter, and we were going to train it to do different things. Well, number one, it's expensive, so we only had one robot. Number two, it's rather dangerous around humans, right? So you want to teach it to do the right things before you put it around humans. We built Isaac, which is a virtual Baxter, put it in a virtual classroom, and taught it to play dominoes. And to play dominoes safely and smartly and put them in place, and now you can go play, and we took the brain out of the virtual Isaac, put it in the real Baxter, and now it can play dominoes with you. That's an interesting use case, but not very useful, you know, in the end. But what about VR for training AI to drive cars, right? With respect to the lady that was killed, that's a dangerous thing to be doing our R&D around self-driving cars on the street. What if we could do training for AI in virtual reality for self-driving cars? So what you're seeing here is Central Expressway out in the Bay Area. On the top left, that's the real video. On the right is the virtual reality environment that we built to mimic this video, right? And then on the bottom left is the AI that's learning from that. So you're seeing the lane detections, you're seeing the distance detection, that's the green line that goes out there, you're seeing the other objects that are on the street, all built in virtual reality, and we're using that to train there. Now we can change that virtual environment to do different types of training, right? So we've got a virtual reality environment that's the Bay Area, but that doesn't work in Colorado because it snows here, right? So we can throw snow into this. We can throw ice onto the road. We can throw other traffic into this. We can throw humans into this, pedestrians, jaywalkers, dogs, basketballs, kids, cats, right? And we do teach them to swerve around the cats, not towards the cats, right? But all of this can be done at a much faster pace as well, right? So in the Bay Area, it does snow 1 day every 10 years. So if we were going to train in the real world to drive in the Bay Area in snow, we have to wait for 10 years for that 1 day, and we may not get it all done in that 1 day, so 20 years, we might get the second day, right? Now we can throw snow in here and train for every situation that we can do. And we can do it in parallel, right? So Uber's built a fleet of, I don't know, 30, 40, 50, actually I think it's 100 cars that they're out on the road testing. We can do 10,000 training sessions in parallel in minutes just by putting stuff in the data center. So as long as you stop buying the GPUs for Bitcoin mining, we can bring them over to the data center and do training for AI. So just thoughts to leave you with, maybe some inspiration, and hopefully we'll take it from there. Thanks.